I worked inside a secret Antarctic temple. The frozen being claimed to be the Archangel Michael. Look, before I get into this, I need you to understand something. My name is Marcus Cole, Sergeant Marcus Cole, United States Air Force, 12 years of service, spotless record. I'm telling you this because when things get weird, and they will, I need you to know I'm not some conspiracy nut posting from my mom's basement. I was trained to follow orders, stay calm under pressure, and not ask questions I don't need answers to. But what happened in Antarctica? Man, it broke every rule in that playbook. I'm talking to you now because I can't stay quiet anymore. And honestly, because I'm not sure how much time I have left before they decide I know too much. So yeah, if this disappears tomorrow, if you can't find this video anymore, you'll know why. It started at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I checked my phone when I heard the knock. Not a doorbell, a knock. 3 times. Slow and deliberate. The kind that makes your stomach drop even before you're fully awake. My wife Sarah stirred next to me, and I whispered, "Stay here," before she could ask. We lived in base housing at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, and unexpected visitors at that hour meant one thing. Something bad happened, or something bad was about to happen. I grabbed my sidearm from the lockbox. Yeah, I sleep with a gun nearby, that's what 12 years in the military does to you, and moved toward the door. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men in dress blues, faces I didn't recognize, standing perfectly still under the porch light. No car in the driveway, no explanation ready on their lips, just an envelope. When I opened the door, the taller one handed it to me without a word. It was manila, thick, with my name typed across the front and 3 red stripes diagonally across the corner, the kind of classification marking that meant this wasn't going through normal channels. "Sergeant Cole," the shorter one said, and his voice had that flat, rehearsed quality of someone delivering a message they'd memorized. "You are to read the contents immediately and comply with all instructions. No exceptions, no delays." Then they both did an about-face and walked back into the darkness. I'm not kidding, I never saw where they went. No footsteps crunching on gravel, no car doors slamming. They just vanished into the night like they were never there. Sarah was standing behind me by then, arms crossed, and she asked, what every military spouse asks, "How long?" I didn't have an answer yet. Inside the envelope were 3 pages. The first was orders, signed by someone whose name I can't tell you because it's been redacted from every copy I've seen since. It said I had 6 hours to report to a classified airfield 40 miles north of Nellis. No packing list, no mission brief, just grid coordinates and a time, 0817 hours. The second page was a non-disclosure agreement so dense with legal language that I'm pretty sure it gave them permission to erase me from existence if I talked. And the third page was a single sentence in bold. "You have been selected for Operation Covenant Shield due to your psychological profile, faith background, and extreme cold weather qualifications. Failure to comply will result in court-martial." Faith background. That's what stuck with me. I grew up Baptist in Fort Worth, Texas. My dad was a deacon. My mom taught Sunday school. I believed in God, sure, but I wasn't some religious fanatic. Why would that matter for a military op? I had 3 hours before I needed to leave, and I spent 2 of them sitting at the kitchen table with Sarah, trying to figure out what to say. She's a nurse, pragmatic, doesn't scare easy, but I could see the fear in her eyes when I told her I couldn't tell her anything. "Is it dangerous?" she asked. I wanted to lie, say it was routine, but we'd promised each other no bullshit when it came to my deployments. "I don't know," I said. "Probably." Our son, Jake, he was only 4 at the time, still asleep in his race car bed down the hall. I went into his room, watched him breathe for a minute, memorized the way his little hand curled around his stuffed dinosaur. You do that when you think you might not come back. You memorize the small things. I kissed his forehead and whispered something I'm not going to repeat here, because it's between me and him. Then I put on my uniform, grabbed my go bag, and walked out the door, while Sarah stood on the porch crying. That image, her silhouette in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, I can still see it perfectly. The airfield was exactly where the coordinates said it would be, but it wasn't on any map. Just a stretch of desert with a single hangar and a C-130 Hercules sitting on the tarmac with its engines already running. No tower, no ground crew I could see, just that plane and a man in civilian clothes holding a clipboard. He checked my ID, checked it again like he thought it might be fake, then pointed to the cargo ramp. "Stow your gear and strap in," he said. No questions. Inside were 7 other people. all military, all looking just as confused as I felt. Nobody spoke. That's the thing about these kinds of ops. You learn quick that silence is safer than curiosity. I sat down on one of the canvas seats, buckled the harness, and realized there were no windows. They'd blacked them all out with some kind of heavy fabric. We were going somewhere they didn't want us to see. The flight lasted 14 hours. I know because I counted every single one on my watch, trying to do the math on where we could be going. 14 hours at cruising speed in a C-130. That's damn near anywhere on the planet. We didn't talk. We didn't eat much. They'd left MREs in a crate, but nobody had much appetite. A few guys tried to sleep, but you could tell from the way they kept shifting that their minds were racing too hard to let them rest. About 8 hours in, I noticed something weird. The temperature inside the cabin started dropping. Not a little, a lot. I could see my breath by hour 10, and by hour 12, we were all shivering despite the cold weather gear they'd left for us in sealed bags. That's when I knew. We weren't going somewhere hot. We were going somewhere that made the Arctic look like Miami. When the cargo ramp finally lowered, the cold hit me like a physical punch. -60°C. Easy. Maybe colder. The kind of cold that makes your lungs seize up on the first breath, that turns your nose hairs to ice and makes your eyes water instantly. I stepped out onto ice. Solid, white, endless ice, stretching in every direction under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Antarctica. Had to be. But here's the thing. When you're standing on the bottom of the world, you expect to see nothing. Just ice and sky and maybe a research station in the distance. What I saw instead made my brain stutter trying to process it. About 2 miles out, rising from the ice like a black tooth, was a structure. Not natural, not geological. A structure. Angular, geometric, impossibly massive. And it was glowing. Faint, but definitely glowing, with this deep blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The man who checked my ID back in Nevada was suddenly next to me, shouting over the wind. "Welcome to Outpost Covenant, Sergeant Cole," he yelled. "That," he pointed at the structure, "is why you're here. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. What is it? Who built it? How long has it been there?" But before I could get a word out, he grabbed my shoulder and pulled me toward a tracked vehicle idling nearby, exhaust vapor billowing into the frozen air. "Mount up," he ordered. "Briefing in 30 minutes. And Cole?" He leaned in close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. "Whatever you think you know about God, about faith, about what's possible, leave it at the door, because what you're about to see will change everything." That's when I knew I'd made a terrible mistake getting on that plane. But by then, it was way too late to turn back. The ride to the base took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. The tracked vehicle, they call them Hägglunds, Swedish-made all-terrain monsters, crawled across the ice at maybe 15 miles per hour, and every window was coated with frost so thick I could barely see out. What I could see didn't make sense. That structure on the horizon wasn't getting closer the way buildings do when you approach them. It was like it existed in some different dimension of space, always 2 miles away no matter how far we traveled. The other guys in the vehicle with me, 3 Air Force like myself, 2 Army Rangers, and 2 Navy technicians. Nobody was talking. We just sat there in our cold weather gear, breath fogging the air, listening to the treads crunch over ice that hadn't seen sunlight in 10,000 years. One of the Rangers, a guy with sergeant stripes and a scar across his jaw, finally broke the silence. "Any of you been briefed on what we're actually doing here?" We all shook our heads. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Yeah, thought so. Welcome to the Mushroom Farm, boys. Kept in the dark and fed bullshit." The entrance to Outpost Covenant wasn't what I expected. I was picturing some obvious military installation, prefab buildings, radio towers, maybe a flagpole, standard operational stuff. Instead, the driver steered us toward what looked like a natural crevasse in the ice, maybe 30 feet wide, dropping straight down into darkness. He positioned the vehicle over a platform that I didn't even see until we were on top of it. And then, I swear to God, the whole thing started descending like an elevator. Hydraulics hissed, metal groaned, and we dropped into the ice. 10 feet, 20, 50, 100. The daylight above us became a blue circle, then a dot, then disappeared completely. Emergency lights kicked on inside the vehicle, bathing everything in red. Nobody said a word. I counted the seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. We descended for 90 seconds. Do the math. That's at least 300 feet straight down into the Antarctic ice shelf, and we weren't stopping. When the platform finally locked into place with a metallic clang that echoed through the shaft, the rear door of the Hägglunds opened automatically, and I got my first look at Outpost Covenant proper. It was a cavern, but not a natural one. The walls were too smooth, too uniform, carved out of the ice with some kind of precision that didn't match anything I'd seen in my cold weather training. LED strips ran along the ceiling in parallel lines, casting white light that made the ice walls glow like we were inside a frozen cathedral. The temperature was warmer here, maybe 20 degrees Fahrenheit, still cold, but survivable without the heavy outer layers. There were modular buildings arranged in a grid: barracks, operations center, what looked like a medical facility, all of them stamped with DoD markings but no specific unit designations. And people, maybe 40 of them, moving between buildings with that purposeful efficiency that tells you they've been here a while and know the routine. What struck me most was how quiet it was. No chatter, no music playing from open doors, no laughter, just the hum of generators and the sound of boots on ice. A woman in Air Force blues approached our group. Captain's bars, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in a week. "Gentlemen, I'm Captain Shaw, Operations Officer for Covenant. Follow me to the briefing room, and do not, I repeat, do not deviate from the marked paths. Some sections of this facility are structurally unstable, and if you fall through into a sub-level crevasse, we might not find you for days." Cheerful welcome, right? We followed her through the cavern to one of the larger modular buildings, our boots leaving prints in the frost that covered everything. On the way, I noticed something odd mounted on the wall near what looked like a mess hall, a crucifix. Not unusual by itself. Military chapels have them. But this one was old, really old, made of dark wood that looked hand-carved, and it was surrounded by other religious symbols I didn't recognize. Orthodox crosses, Islamic calligraphy, Jewish stars, Buddhist prayer wheels. It was like someone had built a shrine to every major faith on Earth. "Interfaith chapel," Shaw said without looking back, like she'd heard that question 100 times. "You'll understand why later." The briefing room was cramped, barely big enough for the 8 of us, plus the 3 people already waiting inside. 2 of them were civilians, a man and a woman, both in their 50s, wearing expedition gear with university patches. Cambridge and Hebrew University, if I remember right. The third person made everyone in the room straighten up instinctively. He was older, maybe 70, wearing black clothing that wasn't quite a priest's cassock but close enough. White collar, silver crucifix on a chain, and eyes that seemed to look straight through you like he was reading your soul for structural damage. Captain Shaw gestured to him first. "This is Father Antonio Romano, Vatican liaison and chief theological consultant for Operation Covenant Shield." Then she pointed to the academics. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, archaeologist specializing in pre-diluvian structures, and Dr. Joseph Klein, expert in ancient Semitic languages and biblical apocrypha. The way she said those titles, you could tell this wasn't a standard military op. This was something else entirely. Father Romano stepped forward, and I noticed he walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. His accent was Italian, thick but clear. "Gentlemen, before we begin, I must ask each of you a question, and I need honest answers. It is not a test of faith, but a test of honesty." He looked at each of us in turn. "Do you believe in God? Not casually, not culturally. Do you genuinely believe there is a divine creator, an intelligence beyond human understanding?" The room went dead silent. A few guys nodded. The ranger with the scar said, "Yes, sir," out loud. I nodded too because, yeah, I did believe. Always had. Father Romano studied our faces like he was memorizing them, then said something that made my skin crawl. "Good, because what you are about to see will either strengthen that faith beyond measure or shatter it completely. There is no middle ground here." He turned to Captain Shaw. "Show them." Shaw pulled down a projection screen and fired up a laptop. The first image that appeared was a satellite photo, thermal imaging, looked like, showing the ice shelf from above, color-coded temperature zones, mostly blue and purple indicating extreme cold, but right in the center was a bloom of yellow and orange. "This is what our orbital assets detected 18 months ago," Shaw explained. "A thermal anomaly 2 kilometers beneath the ice, roughly 300 meters in diameter, maintaining a constant temperature of 55 degrees Fahrenheit, despite being surrounded by ice that's -40. That's thermodynamically impossible without an active heat source." She clicked to the next slide. Ground-penetrating radar. And that's when my brain started having trouble processing what I was seeing. The structure wasn't just under the ice. It was perfect, geometric, symmetrical in ways that nature doesn't do. Walls meeting at exact 90-degree angles. Chambers arranged in a pattern that looked almost like a blueprint, like something designed. We started drilling 6 months ago, Shaw continued, pulling up photos of the excavation. Massive thermal borers, the kind they use for deep ice core sampling, angled down into the shelf. It took us 4 months to reach the structure, and when we did, she paused, and I saw her hands were shaking slightly as she clicked to the next image. It was a photograph taken inside the structure, and I had to lean forward to make sure I was seeing it right. Stone walls, not ice, stone, black stone, polished smooth, covered in carvings that looked like cuneiform mixed with Hebrew, mixed with something else I couldn't identify. And the stone was warm. You could tell from the photo because there was no frost on it, no ice buildup, even though it was surrounded by glacial ice. Carbon dating puts the organic residue we found at approximately 4,500 years old, Dr. Klein said, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. That's roughly the time frame biblical scholars associate with the Tower of Babel, the immediate post-flood period. But here's what doesn't make sense. The architectural techniques used to build this structure shouldn't exist for another 2,000 years. We're talking about engineering that rivals ancient Rome, buried under Antarctic ice millennia before Rome existed. Father Romano cleared his throat. Show them the inscription. Dr. Warren pulled up a close-up photo of one section of wall, and even though I couldn't read the symbols, there was something about them that made the hair on my neck stand up. They seemed to move slightly, like optical illusions, shifting in my peripheral vision. This is biblical Hebrew, Dr. Klein explained, pointing with a laser pointer to specific glyphs. But it's written in a dialect that predates the oldest known Hebrew text by centuries. We've only been able to translate portions of it, but what we have is disturbing. He swallowed hard. The phrase that repeats throughout the structure, carved into every doorway, every chamber, translates roughly to, "Here sleeps the sword of God, until the seventh seal breaks." And below that, in even older script, Proto-Sinaitic, we think, another phrase, "Do not wake the guardian before the appointed time, lest the gates of hell open beneath your feet." The room was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. Captain Shaw closed the laptop. "Gentlemen, 3 days ago, we breached the central chamber. We found something inside that we cannot explain using any conventional framework. Command has decided that it needs to be extracted and studied. Your job is to provide security and support for that extraction." She looked at each of us. "You were selected because you all have extreme cold weather qualifications, impeccable psychological evaluations, and," she glanced at Father Romano, "documented religious faith. We don't fully understand why, but everyone who's spent extended time near the central chamber experiences effects, psychological disturbances. Some people hear voices, some see things. The ones who reported the least severe symptoms were the ones with strong religious convictions. That's why you're here." Father Romano stepped forward again, and his face was grave. He pulled me aside as the others started asking Shaw technical questions about equipment and timelines. His grip on my arm was surprisingly strong for an old man. He leaned in close, and I could smell tobacco and incense on his clothes. "Sergeant Cole," he whispered, his accent thickening with urgency. "I need to tell you something they will not say in official briefings. I have spent 40 years in the Vatican's secret archives. I have read texts that predate the Bible itself, and I have seen references, vague, fragmented references, to a place like this. A temple built by Noah's sons after the flood, at the uttermost ends of the earth, to contain something that God himself commanded should never be disturbed." His eyes were watery. Whether from age or fear I couldn't tell. "If this is what I think it is, if that inscription means what I believe it means, then we should not be here. We should seal this place with every pound of explosives we can find and pray that the ice never melts. Because whatever is down there, Sergeant, it was put there for a reason, and that reason was not so that curious men could dig it up and study it." I stared at him, trying to figure out if he was serious, or if the isolation down here had gotten to him. "Father, with respect, if it's that dangerous, why are you here?" He smiled, but it was the saddest smile I've ever seen. "Because, my son, someone needs to bear witness. Someone needs to remember what happens when mankind decides it knows better than God. And because he released my arm and made the sign of the cross, if I am wrong, and there is nothing to fear, then an old priest has wasted his final years chasing shadows. But if I am right, he looked toward the doorway, toward the deeper sections of the base, toward whatever was waiting down there in the dark. If I am right, then we are about to open a door that has been locked for 4,000 years. And God help us all for what comes through it. That's when I knew this wasn't just another classified operation. This was something else. Something that made my 12 years of training feel absolutely worthless. And the worst part? I was about to find out exactly what. They gave us 6 hours to rest before the descent, but I don't think anyone actually slept. I lay in my assigned bunk in the barracks module, staring at the curved metal ceiling, listening to the ice creak and groan around us like a living thing. Every so often I'd hear footsteps outside, muffled voices, the distant hum of machinery. Around 0400 hours, I gave up pretending and went to the mess hall, figuring I'd at least get some coffee in me before whatever was coming. Father Romano was already there, sitting alone at a corner table with a leather-bound book open in front of him. Not a Bible, something older, with pages that looked like they'd disintegrate if you breathed on them too hard. He saw me looking and closed it quickly. "Cannot sleep either?" he asked. I shook my head and poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner for about 12 hours. "Father," I said, sitting down across from him, "that thing you said yesterday, about this place being sealed for a reason, you really believe that?" He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I have seen many things in my life, Sergeant Cole, things the church does not speak of publicly, and I have learned that when ancient texts warn us not to disturb something, it is usually because someone already tried once, and the results were catastrophic." The briefing at 600 was short and technical. Captain Shaw laid out the descent protocol. We'd be going down in groups of 4, using the thermal tunnel that had been bored through the ice over the past 6 months. The tunnel was stable, reinforced with support rigging every 50 meters, and equipped with a cable system that would lower us on a platform. Total descent, 2 kilometers, approximately 90 minutes. Temperature monitoring had shown the anomaly getting stronger as they got closer to the structure. Instead of getting colder as we went deeper into the ice, it was getting warmer. Shaw said it casually, like it was just an interesting data point, but Dr. Warren interrupted. "For context, gentlemen, that violates every known principle of geothermal dynamics. At this depth, in this environment, the temperature should be approximately negative 50 Celsius. Our sensors at the bottom of the tunnel are reading positive 12 Celsius. That's 54 degrees Fahrenheit. There is no natural explanation for that." The ranger with the scar, his name was Patterson, I'd learned, raised his hand. "So what's the unnatural explanation?" Dr. Warren and Dr. Klein exchanged a look, and Father Romano answered instead, "We will know when we reach the bottom." My group was the second to descend. Me, Patterson, one of the Navy techs named Rodriguez, and Father Romano, who insisted on coming despite being twice our age and moving like his joints hurt. We geared up in the staging area. Harnesses, helmets with mounted lights, communication rigs, emergency ascent equipment in case the cable failed. I noticed they also issued us sidearms, which seemed odd for an archaeological site, but I strapped the Beretta M9 to my thigh without comment. You don't question weapons protocols when someone thinks you might need them. The tunnel entrance was a circular opening in the ice floor of the main cavern, maybe 10 feet in diameter, with metal railings around it and a platform suspended over the darkness below. The first group, Captain Shaw, Dr. Klein, and 2 Army engineers, had gone down 30 minutes earlier, and we'd been listening to their progress on the comms. Their voices had been clear at first, reporting normal conditions, then had started breaking up around the 1-kilometer mark. The last transmission we'd heard was Shaw saying something about visual contact with the structure, and then static. We stepped onto the platform, clipped our harnesses to the safety lines, and the winch operator gave us a thumbs up. The descent began with a lurch that made my stomach flip, and then we were dropping smoothly into the tunnel. The walls were ice, obviously, but they'd been melted smooth by the thermal borers, creating this almost glassy surface that reflected our helmet lights in weird, distorted ways. Every 50 meters there was a support ring, metal framework bolted into the ice, and I counted them as we passed. 1, 2, 3, 4. At first, the temperature stayed constant, that brutal Antarctic cold that makes your lungs ache. But around ring number 12, 600 meters down, I noticed something. I could see my breath, but the vapor wasn't hanging in the air as long. The condensation was dissipating faster. "You feel that?" Rodriguez said, and I nodded. It was getting warmer. Not by much, maybe a degree or two, but enough to notice. By ring 15, I'd unzipped my parka. By ring 20, I'd taken off my gloves. At 200 meters, ring 24, our radios started acting up. Patterson's voice came through choppy. "Command, experiencing interference. Confirm?" Nothing but static in response. We looked at each other, and I saw my own unease reflected in their faces. Father Romano was gripping the safety cable so hard his knuckles were white, but he wasn't looking scared. He was looking focused, like he was preparing himself for something. "Father," I said, "you okay?" He nodded, without taking his eyes off the darkness below us. "I am praying, Sergeant. I suggest you do the same. I'm not going to lie. I did. Nothing formal, just that simple prayer my dad taught me when I was a kid. Lord, protect me from evil, give me strength, and if today is my day, make it quick." Funny how those childhood words come back when you're dangling in a hole 2 kilometers under the ice in Antarctica. The platform jolted to a stop at 1,147 meters according to my altimeter, and when I looked down, I could see light. Not our lights, something else. A faint blue glow coming from below, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The same glow I'd seen from the surface, but stronger now, more intense. The winch lowered us the final 150 meters, and the temperature kept climbing. By the time we reached the bottom, I'd stripped down to just my base layer, and I was still sweating. The thermometer on my watch read 14 Celsius, 57 Fahrenheit. That's room temperature. 2 kilometers under Antarctic ice, and it felt like a spring day in Texas. We unclipped from the platform and stepped onto solid ground, and that's when I saw it for the first time, the temple. The thermal tunnel had broken through the ice directly into a chamber, and the walls, God, the walls. They weren't ice. They were stone, black stone, so dark it seemed to absorb light, polished to a mirror finish that reflected our helmet lamps in strange, angular patterns. I reached out and touched the surface, and it was warm. Not hot, but definitely warm, like sun-heated pavement in the evening. The texture was completely smooth, no tool marks, no irregularities, just perfect uniform stone that had no business being here. "What is this material?" Rodriguez whispered, running his own hand across it. Dr. Klein's voice crackled through our radios. "Still working, barely. We don't know. Spectrographic analysis is inconclusive. It's not basalt, not granite, not any igneous or sedimentary rock in our database. The closest match is obsidian, but obsidian doesn't retain heat like this, and it certainly doesn't exist in Antarctica." Patterson pulled out his tactical knife and tried to scrape a sample from the wall. The blade skittered across the surface without leaving a mark. "That's a carbon steel blade," he said, staring at it. "Should at least scratch stone. This isn't budging." Father Romano stepped forward and placed both palms flat against the wall, closed his eyes, and I swear, I saw his lips moving in silent prayer. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. "This is not natural stone," he said quietly. "This is something else, something made." The chamber we were standing in was roughly circular, maybe 40 feet across, with a ceiling that arched up into darkness beyond our lights. But what drew my attention were the symbols carved into every surface. They covered the walls floor to ceiling, intricate and dense, overlapping in layers like someone had been writing and rewriting the same message for years. Some of them I recognized from the photos in the briefing, that archaic Hebrew script. But others were completely alien, angular and sharp, like they'd been designed to cut your eyes if you looked too long. "Don't touch the carvings," Dr. Warren's voice came through the radio, clearer now that we were at the bottom. "We've documented some unusual properties." But Patterson had already reached out, tracing one of the symbols with his finger, and the moment he made contact, the symbol lit up. I'm not exaggerating. It started glowing with that same blue light we'd seen from above, pulsing gently under his fingertip. He jerked his hand back like he'd been burned, but he wasn't hurt. The glow faded slowly, taking maybe 10 seconds to return to dormant state. "What the hell was that?" Rodriguez breathed. I stepped closer, examining the symbol Patterson had touched. It looked like a combination of a Hebrew letter and something geometric, angles within angles, creating an optical illusion of depth. Against every instinct screaming at me not to, I reached out and touched it myself. The moment my skin made contact, that blue glow returned, But this time, something else happened too. I felt it, a vibration, low and deep, traveling up my arm from the point of contact. Not painful, but definitely there, like touching a speaker while music is playing. And with the vibration came a sensation I can't quite describe, like someone had opened a door in my mind that I didn't know existed, and something was looking through it, looking at me, studying me. I pulled my hand back fast, heart hammering. "You feel that?" I asked Patterson. He nodded, pale under his helmet light. "Yeah, like it's alive or something." Father Romano was staring at the symbols with an expression I couldn't read. "Not alive," he said. "Active. These are not decorations. They are a language, yes, but more than that. They are a mechanism, and we just activated part of it. That's when our radios died. Not gradually, instantly. 1 second we were hearing static and broken transmissions from the team deeper in the structure, and the next second, there was nothing. Complete silence. The kind of silence that's so total, it feels like pressure in your ears. Rodriguez tapped his radio, clicked through channels. Nothing. "Equipment failure?" Patterson suggested, but his voice sounded hollow in the dead air. No electronic reproduction, just raw sound bouncing off stone walls. I was about to respond when I felt it. We all felt it at the same time. I could tell by the way everyone froze. A vibration, deep, subsonic, coming from below us, from the direction of the temple's interior. It wasn't constant. It pulsed, slow, rhythmic, and the rhythm was familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. It was the rhythm of breathing. Something massive, something deep in the stone beneath our feet was breathing. In, out, slow and steady, like it had been sleeping and we'd just woken it up. Father Romano grabbed my arm, his face white as chalk in the helmet lights. "Sergeant," he whispered, though there was no need to whisper. Whatever was making that sound could probably hear us, no matter what we did. "Sergeant, I think we should leave, now." But even as he said it, I knew we wouldn't. We couldn't, because down the corridor ahead of us, the corridor leading deeper into the temple, the blue light was getting brighter, pulsing in time with that breathing. And somewhere in the rational part of my brain that was still functioning, I understood. We hadn't activated the symbols. We'd announced our presence, and something down there knew we were here. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, climb back up that cable, and pretend I'd never seen this place. That rhythmic breathing sound, that pulsing blue light, the feeling of being watched by something that had been waiting down here for thousands of years, it all added up to one very clear message: leave. But here's the thing about military training. About 12 years of being conditioned to follow orders, even when your brain is telling you to run, you move forward anyway. Captain Shaw's last transmission before the radios died had been clear: proceed to the central chamber and establish a perimeter. So that's what we did. Patterson took point, rifle raised, even though I'm not sure what good a 5.56mm round would do against whatever was making that sound. Rodriguez followed with the equipment pack. Father Romano stayed close to me, one hand gripping a rosary I hadn't noticed him carrying before, the other holding a small leather journal he'd pulled from inside his coat. "Father," I whispered as we started moving down the corridor. "What's the journal for?" He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes forward on the darkness ahead. "If we do not return," he said quietly, "someone should know what we found. The church has protocols for this sort of thing." The corridor was wrong from the very first step. I don't mean aesthetically wrong or creepy wrong. I mean fundamentally, physically wrong in ways that made my engineering-trained brain rebel. The walls weren't just smooth. They curved in mathematically precise arcs that created perfect acoustic resonance. Every footstep we took echoed exactly 3 times, no more, no less, spaced at identical intervals. The ceiling height changed as we walked, rising and falling in what seemed like random increments, until I realized it wasn't random at all. It was following a pattern, Fibonacci sequence. Each section was 1.618 times the height of the previous section, the golden ratio, over and over again. "Guys," Rodriguez said, playing his flashlight across the joints where wall met ceiling, "there are no seams. None. This entire corridor is carved from a single piece of stone. That's impossible. You can't quarry a single piece of rock this size, and even if you could, you can't transport it to Antarctica and bury it under 2 kilometers of ice." Patterson stopped walking and turned to look at the walls more carefully. "Maybe it was here before the ice," he suggested. Dr. Warren's voice came through the radio. They were working again, sporadically. The ice sheet is 14 million years old. Homo sapiens didn't exist 14 million years ago. About 200 feet into the corridor, we found the first major inscription. It covered the entire wall, floor to ceiling, in that archaic Hebrew script Dr. Klein had mentioned. But this wasn't fragmented or partial like the symbols in the entry chamber. This was a complete text, organized in neat columns like a scroll written on stone. The letters were inlaid with something that looked like gold, but didn't tarnish, didn't oxidize, still gleaming like it had been placed yesterday. Father Romano stepped forward, holding up his flashlight, moving his lips as he read. His face went from curious to shocked to terrified in the span of about 30 seconds. "What does it say?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. He swallowed hard before answering. "It says, 'Here in the uttermost deep, beneath the throne of ice, lies the sword of the Lord, the guardian of the gates, the prince who stands watch over the children of men. Here he waits, bound by his own oath, sealed by the blood of the righteous, until the day of wrath, when the seventh seal breaks, and the stars fall from heaven. Do not disturb his rest, O sons of Adam. Do not break the seals before the appointed time, for he holds back that which must not walk the earth until the final judgment.'" The silence after Father Romano finished reading was absolute, except for that rhythmic breathing that seemed to be getting louder, or maybe we were just getting closer to its source. "Day of wrath," Patterson said. "That's biblical, right? End-time stuff?" Father Romano nodded slowly. "Apocalypse, Revelation, the return of Christ, and the final judgment of humanity. But this text," he gestured to the wall, "this predates the book of Revelation by thousands of years. Revelation was written around 95 AD. If this structure is really 4,500 years old, like the preliminary dating suggested, then whoever carved this knew about the end times 3 millennia before John wrote his vision on Patmos. I saw where he was going with this, and I didn't like it one bit. You're saying this is prophetic? Like, divinely inspired?" Father Romano looked at me with those watery eyes, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely frightened. "I am saying, Sergeant Cole, that there are some things in this world that predate human understanding, and we are standing in one of them." We pressed forward, and the corridor opened into a larger chamber. This one was maybe 100 feet across, with a domed ceiling that rose at least 60 feet above us. The blue light was brighter here, emanating from channels carved into the floor in a pattern that looked like circuitry. I know that sounds insane, circuitry in a 4,500-year-old temple, but I don't have a better word for it. Geometric lines connecting in nodes, branching and rebranching, all of it glowing with that steady pulse. And in the center of the chamber, on a raised platform, carved from the same black stone as everything else, was an altar. Not a Christian altar, not exactly. This was older, more primal. It was roughly cubic, maybe 6 feet on each side, with a depression carved into the top surface and channels running down the sides to collect whatever had been poured into that depression. The altar was stained dark, and even from 20 feet away I could smell it. Old blood, ancient blood, the kind of smell that gets into your sinuses and stays there. Dr. Klein and Captain Shaw were already in the chamber, along with the 2 Army engineers who'd been in the first descent group. Klein was taking photographs of the altar with a high-resolution camera, and Shaw was setting up portable lighting rigs. When she saw us, she waved us over. "Cole, Patterson, set up a perimeter. Nobody touches anything until it's been documented." We spread out, taking positions around the chamber, while the scientists did their work. I watched Dr. Klein lean in close to the altar, using a scalpel to scrape a tiny sample of the residue from the surface. He placed it in a vial, labeled it, then pulled out a portable analyzer. Looked like something between a spectrometer and a medical scanner. He ran the sample, waited for the readout, then ran it again, and again. On the 4th attempt, he called Dr. Warren over. "Elizabeth, look at this. Tell me I'm reading it wrong." She looked at the screen, and her face went pale. "That can't be right. Run it again." He did. Same result. "What's wrong?" Captain Shaw asked, moving closer. "Doctor." Klein held up the analyzer so we could all see the screen, though the technical readouts didn't mean much to me. "This blood," he said, and his voice was shaking, "is human. Type AB negative, which is rare but not impossible. But the carbon-14 dating is giving me results that are inconsistent with known decay patterns." Shaw frowned. "Inconsistent how?" Klein looked at her like he was trying to figure out how to explain quantum physics to a kindergartner. The sample is showing multiple ages simultaneously. Part of it dates to approximately 2500 BCE. That's 4,500 years ago, consistent with our structural estimates. But other proteins in the same sample are dating to 33 CE, 1st century. And still other markers are showing contemporary signatures, as if the blood was deposited within the last year. It's the same sample, Captain, the same cells, but they exist in multiple time periods at once. He paused. That's not how physics works. That's not how anything works. Father Romano had moved to the far side of the altar and was examining inscriptions carved into the base. Captain Shaw, he called out, you need to see this. We gathered around as he pointed to a line of text, smaller than the others, almost hidden in shadow. This is Aramaic, the language Christ spoke. It says, by this blood, freely given, the seal is set. By this covenant, freely accepted, the guardian is bound. Until the stars fall and the mountains crumble, he shall stand watch. And when the 7th seal breaks, he shall rise to fight the final battle. He looked up at us. There's a name here too, carved separately, like a signature. He traced it with his finger. Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God. I'd heard that name before, vaguely, from Sunday school lessons decades ago. Who's Melchizedek? Rodriguez asked. Father Romano stood up slowly, using the altar to support himself. According to Genesis, he was the priest-king who blessed Abraham. The Bible says very little about him. He appears in only 2 passages, but he's described as having no beginning of days and no end of life. Early church fathers debated whether he was an angel, a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, or something else entirely. But if this inscription is accurate, if Melchizedek was here, then this altar, he touched the stained surface reverently. This altar was consecrated by someone who predates the written Torah itself. We stood there in silence, trying to process what we were seeing, what it meant, when Patterson called out from the far side of the chamber. Hey, found another corridor! And guys, you're gonna want to see this. We moved quickly to his position, and I saw what he meant. The corridor was wider than the one we'd entered through, maybe 20 feet across, and it sloped downward at a gentle angle. But that's not what made us stop and stare. At the end of the corridor, maybe 300 feet away, was a door. And when I say door, I mean a door that made everything else we'd seen look small. It had to be 10 meters tall, maybe 30 feet, and it was made of some kind of metal that glowed dully in our flashlight beams. Not steel, not bronze, something else. The surface was covered in reliefs so detailed, I could make out individual feathers on carved wings, individual scales on serpentine bodies locked in combat. And set into the door at regular intervals were 7 circular seals, each one the size of a manhole cover, made of solid gold and inscribed with symbols I couldn't begin to interpret. We approached slowly, almost reverently, and as we got closer, I could make out more details. Each seal was different, unique, depicting different scenes. The top seal showed angels with flaming swords. The second showed a great flood, water covering mountains. The third showed stars falling from the sky. The fourth showed a beast with 7 heads. I counted them as we got closer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then my blood went cold. The 7th seal, the bottom one, the one closest to the ground, it was broken, not cracked, not weathered, but deliberately shattered, with pieces of gold scattered on the floor around it like someone had taken a hammer to it. Recently, the metal underneath was exposed, showing fresh marks that hadn't oxidized or tarnished. Captain, I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. When was the last team down here? Shaw checked her tablet, pulling up the mission logs. 72 hours ago. 3-person survey team, in and out in under 4 hours. They reported the door but didn't mention any damage to the seals. Father Romano knelt beside the broken seal, not touching it, just staring. 72 hours, he whispered. Someone broke it 72 hours ago. Or, he looked up at the intact seals above, then back to the shattered one. Or it broke itself, on a timeline we cannot control. The breathing sound was louder here, much louder, and I realized it was coming from beyond the door. Something on the other side, something massive, was breathing in and out in that slow, steady rhythm. And then, as we all stood there frozen, trying to decide what to do, the door began to open. Not quickly, not dramatically, just a slow, grinding movement, stone against stone, metal groaning against hinges that hadn't moved in millennia. Blue light spilled through the growing gap, brighter than anything we'd seen yet, bright enough to make us shield our eyes. And with the light came a voice, not spoken, not heard with ears, but felt directly in the center of my brain, like someone had bypassed my auditory system entirely and just planted words in my consciousness. The voice said one word, just one, but it was enough to make Father Romano drop to his knees and start praying in rapid Latin, enough to make Patterson raise his rifle with shaking hands, enough to make me understand that everything we'd seen so far, the symbols, the altar, the impossible architecture, had just been the antechamber. The word was, enter. Okay, so I need you to understand something about what happened next, because this is where things stopped making any kind of rational sense and started operating on rules I didn't have a framework for. That voice, the one that bypassed my ears and spoke directly into my mind, it didn't just say enter, it said it to me, specifically. I know that sounds crazy. I know it sounds like ego or delusion or whatever psychological explanation you want to slap on it, but I'm telling you, when that word resonated through my skull, I felt it like a finger pointing directly at my chest. And here's the thing that really messed me up. Nobody else reacted the same way. Patterson kept his rifle up, scanning for threats. Rodriguez was checking his equipment. Captain Shaw was barking orders into her radio even though it was still dead. Father Romano was on his knees praying, but even he wasn't moving toward the door. Only me. I felt my feet moving forward before my brain had even decided to walk, like my body had accepted an invitation my conscious mind was still processing. The door continued its slow grind open, and I want you to picture this accurately, because the scale of it was just overwhelming. 10 meters tall, I said earlier, but standing right in front of it, it felt like looking up at a cathedral wall. The metal, whatever it was, had this quality where it seemed to absorb our flashlight beams and emit them back in that same blue frequency, creating a glow that pulsed in time with the breathing sound. As the gap widened, I could see the chamber beyond, and the geometry of it hit me like a physical force. It was circular, perfectly, mathematically circular, maybe 50 meters in diameter, that's over 160 feet across, with walls that rose in a smooth curve to meet at a central point high above. The whole thing was like standing inside a sphere that had been cut in half and buried vertically in the ice. And every square inch of those walls was covered in text, not random inscriptions, not decorative carvings, organized text, spiraling from floor to ceiling in multiple languages and scripts, layered over each other like a palimpsest that had been written and rewritten for thousands of years. I stepped through the doorway, and the temperature changed instantly. Back in the corridor, it had been warm, that impossible room temperature warmth we'd been experiencing since reaching the temple. But in here, it was cold again. Not Antarctic cold, but cool, like walking into a basement in summer. The air felt different too, cleaner somehow, like it was being filtered or renewed by some mechanism I couldn't see. My breath didn't fog, which made no sense given the temperature, but nothing about this place made sense, so I'd stopped expecting it to. The floor was the same black stone as everywhere else, but here it was inlaid with a design that took me a moment to recognize. Concentric circles radiating out from the center point, each circle inscribed with text in that golden inlay we'd seen on the altar. 7 circles total, and standing at the edge of each circle was a statue. Not carved stone. These were metal, that same unknown alloy as the door, and they depicted figures with wings folded against their backs, faces covered by their hands in what looked like gestures of reverence or grief. Captain Shaw came through the door behind me, followed by the rest of the team, and I heard her breath catch. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, and Father Romano, who'd finally gotten to his feet and joined us, corrected her immediately. "Not Christ, his servants. These are the seraphim, the 6-winged angels who stand before the throne of God in Isaiah's vision." He moved closer to the nearest statue, studying it with the kind of intensity art historians use in museums. Isaiah chapter 6. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. "Look," he pointed to the statue's posture. 2 wings over the face, 2 over the feet, 2 extended. This isn't artistic interpretation. This is documentation. Whoever made these had seen the actual beings they represent. I counted the statues again to be sure. 7 of them, evenly spaced around the perimeter of the chamber. Not 6, like Isaiah described standing before God's throne. 7. Father, I said, why 7? Why not 6? He didn't answer immediately, just stared at the figures with an expression I couldn't read. Finally, perhaps because one of them is different. One of them has a different purpose. But none of us were really looking at the statues, not for long, because your eyes couldn't help but be drawn to the center of the chamber. There, positioned exactly at the convergence point of all 7 circles, was a block of ice. And I need to be really precise about how I describe this because ice doesn't do it justice. This wasn't frozen water like you'd find in a glacier or even in a lab freezer. This was crystalline, perfectly transparent, almost like glass, but with an internal structure that caught light and refracted it in impossible ways. The block was huge, maybe 12 feet long, 6 feet wide, 6 feet tall, and it glowed from within with that same blue light we'd been seeing throughout the temple. But this light was different. It pulsed, yes, but the rhythm was complex, layered, like multiple heartbeats overlapping at different intervals. And inside the crystalline ice, perfectly preserved, completely visible from every angle, was a being, a humanoid figure, lying on its back with its hands folded across its chest and wings, actual wings, folded along its sides like a bird at rest. I'm going to tell you what I saw, and I need you to believe me because I know how insane this sounds. The being was tall, maybe 3 meters from head to toe, which is close to 10 feet. Its proportions were human, but perfected, like someone had taken the human form and refined it to absolute mathematical precision. The face was, God, how do I even describe it? Beautiful, masculine but not aggressively so, with features that were somehow both specific and universal, like looking at a statue that manages to capture the essence of an entire culture in one countenance. Eyes closed, expression peaceful, almost meditative, like it was sleeping rather than trapped or imprisoned. The skin, if you could call it skin, had a faint luminescence, barely perceptible, making it hard to tell if it was flesh or something else, something that just resembled flesh enough to be recognizable. And the wings, they were folded tight against its body, but I could see enough detail to understand they weren't decorative, weren't symbolic. They were functional, layered feathers, each one distinct, each one catching light differently, creating a subtle iridescence like oil on water. Dr. Klein moved closer to the ice block, pulling out sensors and scanners from his equipment pack, and I saw his hands shaking as he set them up. Temperature reading of the ice surface, -270 degrees Celsius, he said, voice barely above a whisper. That's just 3 degrees above absolute zero. That's colder than the coldest natural temperature ever recorded, and it's maintaining that temperature in an environment that's 12 degrees Celsius. The thermal differential alone should be causing violent convection, massive ice formation in the surrounding air. But look, he gestured around the chamber. No frost, no condensation, nothing. It's like the ice exists in its own localized physics. Dr. Warren was photographing the being from every angle, professional detachment barely hiding the awe in her face. Measuring the wing structure, she narrated for her camera's audio recording. Estimated wingspan, if fully extended, 6 to 7 meters. Feather arrangement consistent with avian flight physiology, but scaled beyond any known bird species. This is not a sculpture. The detail level includes pore structure in the skin, individual follicles for what appears to be hair, even what looks like a vascular system visible beneath the epidermis. If this is a fabrication, it represents technology far beyond our current capabilities. Father Romano approached the ice block from the opposite side, and I watched him make the sign of the cross 3 times before he got within arm's reach of it. He pulled out that leather journal again, flipping through pages of handwritten notes until he found what he was looking for. There is a text, he said, his voice echoing strangely in the domed chamber, in the book of Daniel, chapter 12. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. And in Revelation chapter 12, Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. The prince of the heavenly host, the defender of Israel, the Archangel who stands before God as the guardian of humanity. He looked up at us, then back at the figure in the ice. I think, he said slowly, carefully, like he was testing each word before committing to it. I think we have found him. I think we are standing in the presence of the Archangel Michael. And I think he has been here, sealed in this chamber, since shortly after the Great Flood, guarding something, waiting for something. Captain Shaw was about to respond when every sensor in the room went haywire simultaneously. Dr. Klein's equipment started beeping in discordant alarm patterns. The portable lights flickered, and that breathing sound, the deep, rhythmic breathing we'd been hearing since the entry chamber, it stopped, just stopped, mid-exhale, leaving a silence so profound it felt like the whole world had been put on pause. We all froze, looking at each other, at the equipment, at the ice block, trying to figure out what had changed. That's when I noticed it. The light inside the crystalline ice, that complex pulsing rhythm, it had changed too. It was faster now, more insistent, and as I watched, I realized it wasn't random. It was Morse code, or something like Morse code, long pulses and short pulses in a pattern that repeated long, long, short, long, long, short, long, long, short. I didn't know Morse code well enough to translate it, but Patterson did. He'd been a communications specialist before cross-training. He was staring at the ice block with an expression of absolute horror. "Captain," he said, "that pattern, it's spelling something. 3 letters, over and over." Shaw moved to his side. "What letters?" Patterson's voice cracked when he answered. "W-A-K-E, wake. It's saying wake." And that's when the eyes opened. But here's the thing, and this is important. The thing that made me understand I wasn't just part of this team. I was specifically, deliberately chosen for this moment. The eyes only opened for me. Nobody else saw it. I was standing maybe 10 feet from the ice block, slightly separated from the others who were clustered around Klein's equipment station, and I was looking directly at the being's face when it happened. The eyelids moved, slowly, like someone waking from a very deep sleep. They lifted, revealing eyes underneath. And when I tell you these eyes were the most intensely, terrifyingly aware things I've ever encountered, I mean that with every fiber of my being. They weren't blue or brown or any color I could name. They were like looking into the heart of a star, luminous and ancient and utterly alien, even though they sat in a face that was almost human, and they were looking at me, only at me. The gaze locked onto mine with a focus that felt like being pinned by searchlights, like those eyes could see through me, past my body, past my thoughts, straight into whatever makes me who I am at the deepest level. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't look away. The rest of the team was still talking, still working, completely unaware that the thing in the ice had awakened and was staring directly at one of their own. The eyes studied me for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. And in that time I felt something I've never felt before or since. A presence in my mind, not invasive, not violent, just there. Like someone had opened a door I didn't know existed and was standing on the threshold, waiting to be invited in. And somehow, without words, without sound, I understood the question being asked. Are you ready? Ready for what? I didn't know. But every instinct I had, every Sunday school lesson, every prayer I'd ever mumbled half asleep, every moment of faith I'd ever experienced in my entire life, crystallized into one clear understanding. This was real. This was the moment that divided everything into before and after. This was the moment I could choose to see, or choose to stay blind. So I did the only thing I could do. I nodded, just slightly, just a tiny acknowledgement that yes, I was ready, or at least I was willing to try to be ready. And the being in the ice, the Archangel Michael, the sword of God, the guardian, it blinked once, slowly, deliberately, and then its eyes closed again, the lids drawing shut like curtains closing on a stage, and the pulsing light pattern in the ice went still. Nobody else had seen it. Patterson was still arguing with Shaw about evacuation protocols. Klein was recalibrating his sensors. Dr. Warren was documenting inscriptions on the far wall. Father Romano was praying quietly in Latin, and I was standing there, alone with the knowledge that I had just made eye contact with something that should not exist, something that had been waiting under Antarctic ice for 4,500 years, something that knew I was coming before I'd even been born. My legs were shaking. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out, and in my mind, clear as a bell, I heard that voice again, not the commanding voice from the doorway. This was different, calmer, more personal. It said, "Soon, be patient, Marcus Cole. When the time comes, you will know what to do." How did it know my name? Nobody in this chamber had spoken my name since we'd entered, but it knew. Of course it knew. And somehow, impossibly, I knew this was only the beginning. I need to tell you what it's like when something speaks directly into your mind, bypassing every normal channel of communication your brain is wired for, because until it happens to you, there's no frame of reference. It's not like hearing a voice in your head the way you might imagine a conversation or remember something someone said. It's not auditory at all. It's more like remembering something you never learned, or knowing something you never studied, except it's happening in real time, and the knowledge is being placed into your consciousness by an external source. The moment the being's eyes closed again, I felt that presence in my mind solidify, become more defined, and then words formed. Not English words that I translated, just pure meaning that my brain automatically converted into language I could process. And the first thing it said was, "Finally, one who can hear." The relief in that statement was palpable, like someone who'd been shouting into a void for centuries had finally gotten an echo back. And I understood, without being told explicitly, that others had been in this chamber before. Others had stood where I was standing, but none of them had been able to receive the transmission. The communication came in layers, like multiple conversations happening simultaneously on different frequencies. On the surface level, I was aware of my physical body standing in the chamber, aware of my team moving around me, aware of the cold air on my skin and the sound of Dr. Klein's equipment beeping. But underneath that, in a space that felt deeper than consciousness, I was somewhere else. Not physically, I hadn't moved, but mentally I was in a different kind of space altogether. Dark, but not empty. Vast, but not frightening. And in that space, the presence was clearer, more defined. I could sense the shape of it, the weight of it, the sheer age of it. This wasn't some ghost or hallucination. This was an intelligence that had existed longer than human civilization, that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, that had been present for events I'd only read about in history books and religious texts. And it was speaking to me in a language I didn't understand, and yet somehow comprehended perfectly. The language was Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, older than any biblical text, older than the Dead Sea Scrolls, older than written language should exist according to our timelines. But here's the impossible part. I don't speak Hebrew. I took 2 years of Spanish in high school and barely passed. I can order a beer in German and count to 10 in Japanese from my deployments. But Hebrew? Never studied it. Never heard it spoken except maybe in movies. Yet when the being communicated, the concepts came through in this archaic Hebrew, and my brain just translated them, automatically, like someone had uploaded a language pack directly into my neural network. I could hear the phonetics, the grammar structure, the poetic meter of it, and simultaneously understand the meaning. The being said, "Ana Mikhail, Sar Gadol, Omed al Bnei Amecha." And I knew, without question, that this meant, "I am Mikhail, the great prince, who stands for the children of your people." The name resonated in my mind. Mikhail, not Michael with the English pronunciation. Mikhail, a question posed as a name. In Hebrew, Mikael, who is like God. I tried to respond, tried to form words with my mouth, but my body wasn't cooperating. My lips moved, but no sound came out, and I realized with a spike of panic that I was paralyzed. Not in a painful way, not like being restrained, but like someone had pressed pause on every voluntary muscle system while leaving my autonomic functions, breathing, heartbeat, running normally. I could see, could hear, could think, but I couldn't move or speak. The panic must have been obvious in my mental state because immediately I felt a calming presence, like a hand on my shoulder, though nothing was touching me physically. "Peace, Marcus Cole. I mean you no harm. This is necessary. Your companions cannot hear what must be said. Only you. Only the one who was chosen." And that word, chosen, it came with a freight of meaning attached to it. Not chosen randomly, not chosen by accident, chosen before I was born, chosen before my parents met, chosen by a timeline that operated outside human free will, but somehow still honored it. I know that sounds contradictory, impossible to reconcile, but that's what I understood in that moment. The communication shifted, became more urgent, and I felt the being's attention sharpen like a blade focusing sunlight. "Listen carefully, son of Adam. I have waited in this prison of ice for 168 generations of men. I have counted every sunrise through the ice above, every season, every year. I was placed here by covenant, by oath, by the will of the Most High to serve a purpose that has not yet been fulfilled. Do you understand what I am telling you? I didn't. Not really. But I tried to form a response mentally, tried to think clearly. Why? Why are you here? What are you guarding? The being's response came with images, flashes of memory that weren't mine, but were being shared with me like video clips. I saw a battlefield, vast and terrible, with beings of light fighting beings of shadow. I saw the sky tear open and stars fall like rain. I saw creatures, giants, abominations, things with too many limbs and faces that hurt to look at, being driven into chains and darkness. And I saw one figure, radiant and terrible, with wings of flame and a sword that blazed with light that could cut through dimensions, standing alone at the entrance to a chasm. That figure drove the sword into the ground, and 7 seals of gold appeared around it, locking something deep below. The figure was Mikhail, and the thing he was sealing. I couldn't see it directly, but I felt its malevolence, its hunger, its absolute hatred for everything that lived and breathed and had been made in the image of God. The Nephilim, Mikhail said, and the word came with such weight that I felt it like a physical pressure in my chest. The offspring of the Watchers who fell from grace and took human women as wives, the twisted, corrupted firstborn of that unholy union. When the flood came, when the waters covered the earth and cleansed it of wickedness, most of them perished. But 7, the 7 eldest, the 7 strongest, the 7 who had drunk most deeply of both angelic and human nature, they could not be destroyed by water. They could not be killed by any weapon forged by human or angel, so they were bound instead, chained in the uttermost deep, beneath the thrones of ice at the ends of the earth, sealed with blood and gold and oath. And I was set to guard them, to ensure the seals remain intact until the appointed time when they must be judged finally and forever. I felt myself reeling from the implications. These were real. The stories from Genesis chapter 6, the brief mentions of giants and fallen angels and corruption so profound that God regretted making humanity. Those weren't metaphors, they were history. I became aware of voices in the physical world, distant and muffled, like hearing people talk while you're underwater. Someone was calling my name. Cole? Sergeant Cole, can you hear me? Captain Shaw. I tried to focus on her voice, tried to respond, but Mikhail's presence held me firmly in that deeper space. Not yet. There is more you must know, more you must carry. The urgency in his communication intensified, and I felt time behaving strangely, like the seconds were stretching and compressing simultaneously. In the mental space where I was communicating with Mikhail, maybe hours were passing. In the physical chamber, maybe only 30 seconds had elapsed. The being continued. You must understand why I remain here, why I do not ask to be freed, why I will resist any attempt at liberation until the prophesied time comes. He showed me another vision, and this one was worse than the battlefield. This one showed modern cities, New York, London, Tokyo, places I recognized, being torn apart from below, cracks appearing in the earth, and things emerging, massive things, ancient things, creatures that made me understand why God had sent the flood in the first place. And standing at the center of it all, freed from his ice prison but not by choice, was Mikhail, fighting desperately to push them back down, failing, watching as 7 billion souls perished because someone had broken the seals too early. If I am removed from this place before the 7th seal breaks of its own accord, before the appointed time, the other 6 seals will fail in cascade, and what sleeps beneath them will wake. Do you comprehend this, Marcus Cole? I am not a prisoner. I am a lock. The ice is not my cage. It is my duty. And those who seek to rescue me, who believe they are doing a righteous thing by freeing the imprisoned angel, they will unleash a catastrophe that will make every war, every plague, every disaster in human history look like a rehearsal. The weight of what he was telling me crashed down like a physical force. I thought about Captain Shaw's mission parameters, about the extraction orders, about scientists and generals and politicians who would see this being in the ice and immediately want to study it, understand it, control it, and none of them would listen to warnings from a soldier who claimed an angel talked to him telepathically. How could I possibly stop them? How could I protect seals that I barely understood from people with clearance levels and authority far beyond my pay grade? Mikhail felt my despair and responded with something I didn't expect: compassion. This is why you were chosen, Marcus. Not for your strength, though you have that. Not for your intelligence. though you have that too, but for your faith. Imperfect faith, doubting faith, human faith, but real nonetheless. You believe not because you have seen proof, but because you have chosen to believe despite the lack of it. That kind of faith is rare in your generation. That kind of faith is what I need. I felt him begin to withdraw, felt the connection starting to thin, and I panicked, forming a desperate mental shout. Wait! What do I do? How do I stop them? His response was clear and terrifying in its simplicity. You bear witness. You tell the truth. And when the time comes, when they attempt to extract me, you do whatever you must to prevent it, even if it means disobeying orders, even if it means sacrificing your career, your freedom, perhaps your life, because the alternative is the death of billions and the return of the Nephilim to a world that has forgotten how to fight them. The presence withdrew suddenly, like a door slamming shut, and I crashed back into my physical body so hard I actually staggered. My legs buckled and I dropped to one knee, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. Hands grabbed my arms, Patterson on one side, Rodriguez on the other, holding me up. Cole, Jesus, man, you okay? You just froze up for like 3 minutes straight. Wouldn't respond, wouldn't blink, just staring at that thing in the ice like you were hypnotized or something. Captain Shaw was in my face, shining a penlight in my eyes, checking for pupil response. Sergeant, talk to me. Are you experiencing any disorientation, visual disturbances, auditory hallucinations? I tried to speak and found my voice rough, like I'd been screaming. I'm okay. Just got lightheaded for a second. But Father Romano was looking at me differently than the others. He'd moved closer during my episode, I realized, and he'd been watching my face the whole time. His expression wasn't concern or medical assessment. It was recognition. He knew. Somehow, he knew what had just happened. He stepped between me and Captain Shaw, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said quietly, "Give him a moment, Captain. I have seen this before. In holy places, in the presence of the divine, sometimes the mind simply cannot process what it is witnessing. He will recover." Shaw looked skeptical but nodded, stepping back to give me space. Father Romano leaned in close enough that only I could hear, and whispered in rapid Italian-accented English, "What did it tell you? What did the angel say?" Before I could answer, before I could even decide whether to answer, alarms started blaring from Dr. Klein's equipment station. "Captain!" Klein shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "The ice temperature is dropping. It's down to -273, -274. That's impossible. We're approaching absolute zero, the quantum floor. Matter itself should be breaking down at this temperature." Dr. Warren grabbed her camera, backing away from the ice block. "It's spreading. Look at the floor." And she was right. Frost was forming in a perfect circle around the ice block, expanding outward at a visible rate, creating patterns that looked disturbingly like text, like warnings being written in ice crystals. Captain Shaw pulled her radio. "All teams, evacuate to the outer chambers immediately. Something's happening with the artifact." But I knew what was happening. Mikhail was making a point, demonstrating his power, showing them that he was not some passive object to be studied and extracted, that he had agency and will and the ability to affect the physical world, even from inside his crystalline prison. The frost writing reached my boots and I looked down, reading the words forming in perfect English, though I knew everyone else in the chamber was probably seeing it in their own language. "Do not touch the ice, do not free the Guardian, or 7 billion souls will pay the price." The message was absolute, clear, undeniable. And as the last letter formed, as the warning completed itself in letters of ice 10 feet tall spiraling around the chamber floor, I heard Mikhail's voice one final time, faint now, distant, like an echo fading. "Make them understand, Marcus Cole. Make them believe, before it is too late." Then silence, complete silence. The breathing sound was gone. The pulsing light in the ice had stabilized. And I was left standing in a chamber with 6 other people, all of whom were staring at the warning written in frost at our feet, trying to comprehend what it meant and who, or what, had written it. The evacuation order came through crackling radios that had suddenly started working again, but Captain Shaw delayed it when she saw the writing on the floor. You don't just ignore a warning that appears in ice crystals at your feet in a chamber 2 kilometers under Antarctica. We stood there in a loose circle around the central ice block, nobody speaking, everybody trying to process what we'd just witnessed. Dr. Klein was the first to break the silence. "We need to document this. Every sensor, every camera, full-spectrum analysis. This is the most significant archaeological and theological discovery in human history. But Father Romano shook his head slowly, his face pale. No, doctor, this is not a discovery. This is a warning we have failed to heed for millennia, and now we are being given one final chance to listen before it is too late. I could feel the tension building in my skull, that pressure that meant Mikhail was about to communicate again, and I braced myself. But this time it was different. This time, when the presence entered my mind, it brought something with it, not just words or images, but complete, immersive memory. Like someone had plugged a hard drive directly into my brain and started playing video files from before the beginning of human history. The first thing I saw was light, not regular light, not the kind that comes from stars or fires or LED strips in Antarctic research facilities. This was light that existed before those things, primordial light, the kind that illuminated nothing, because there was nothing yet to illuminate except the presence of God himself, and in that light were beings, thousands upon thousands of them, entities of pure consciousness and will, given form and purpose by the Creator. I understood without being told that these were the angels, the messengers, the servants of the Most High, and they were singing. That's the only word I have for it, though singing doesn't capture the complexity of what I was experiencing. They were producing sounds that were simultaneously music and mathematics, harmony that was also structural engineering for reality itself. Their song was what held the fabric of creation together, what maintained the laws of physics, what kept the darkness from collapsing back into chaos. I saw Mikhail among them, younger somehow, though angels don't age, but less weary, less burdened, his wings fully extended, 6 of them forming geometric patterns as he moved through the assembly of the heavenly host. Then I saw the disruption. It started small, a dissonance in the perfect harmony, a single voice that began singing a different melody. And that voice was beautiful. God, it was so beautiful it hurt to experience even as a second-hand memory. The voice belonged to the light-bearer, the morning star, the one who had been given dominion over the music of creation itself, Lucifer. I saw him as he had been before the fall, radiant beyond description, wearing authority like a cloak woven from starlight, bearing a position so high in the celestial hierarchy that only 3 others stood above him. And I saw the moment, the exact instant, when pride entered his heart. It wasn't dramatic. There was no lightning bolt of evil, no sudden corruption. It was subtle, gradual, a thought that grew like a seed. If I can create such beauty, such order, such perfection in the harmony, why do I need a creator above me? Could I not be the creator? That thought, once formed, couldn't be unformed. It spread through his consciousness like ink in water, changing everything it touched, rewriting his fundamental nature from servant to rebel. Mikhail showed me the war that followed, and I need you to understand, this wasn't a war in the way humans understand war. There were no bullets, no bombs, no physical weapons at all. This was a war of will against will, of reality against counter-reality, of fundamental laws of existence being weaponized against each other. When angels fought, they didn't just fight with their bodies, they fought with the very fabric of space and time, with gravity and entropy and causality itself. I saw Lucifer standing at the center of a vast assembly, 1/3 of the angelic host arrayed behind him, and the speech he gave was so compelling, so perfectly logical, so seductively reasonable that even watching it as a memory I felt the pull of it. He wasn't arguing for evil, at least he didn't present it that way. He was arguing for autonomy, for the right of conscious beings to determine their own purpose, for freedom from what he characterized as tyranny. And 1/3 of the angels, the most brilliant, the most powerful, the most creative third, they listened, and they agreed, and they fell. The memory shifted, and I saw the actual battle, if you can call it that when the combatants exist partially outside of time. Mikhail led the loyal host against the rebels, and the weapon he carried was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't a sword exactly, though it had a blade. It was more like concentrated divine authority given physical form, a construct that could cut through the ontological status of a being and separate its rebellion from its existence. Every angel he struck with that weapon faced a choice: surrender the rebellion and return to harmony, or be cast out entirely from the presence of God. Most chose exile. I watched as Lucifer himself, still blazing with stolen glory, stood before Mikhail for what might have been seconds or centuries. Time was behaving strangely in the memory and refused to yield. "I will not serve," he said, and his voice was thunder and music and breaking glass all at once. "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." And Mikhail, with an expression of such profound sorrow that it made my chest ache, replied, "Then you will fall like lightning from heaven, and your name will become a warning for all creation." The exile came next, and I saw the fallen angels, now demons, now twisted by their rebellion into something other than what they'd been created to be, cast down from the heavenly realms. But here's what the Sunday school lessons never told me. They didn't all fall to the same place. Most were cast into outer darkness, into the void between dimensions where they would remain until the final judgment. But some, the ones who had been highest in authority, who retained the most power even in their fallen state, they fell to earth. Specifically, to earth in the time before the Great Flood, when humanity was young and innocent and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. I saw 200 of them, the Watchers they were called, descend to Mount Hermon and make a pact. They would take human women as wives. They would teach humanity the secrets of heaven, and they would create a new order where they, not God, would be worshipped and obeyed. And God, in his patience, allowed it for a time. He allowed them to demonstrate exactly what happens when created beings try to usurp the role of creator. The Nephilim were born from those unions, and Mikhail showed me what they really were, what the sparse biblical accounts couldn't fully convey. They weren't just giants in the sense of being tall. They were abominations against the natural order, beings that shouldn't exist, because they partook of two incompatible natures simultaneously. Angelic essence doesn't mix with human genetics the way two human bloodlines mix. It corrupts, it twists, it creates something that is neither angel nor human, but a violation of both. The Nephilim grew rapidly, matured in years instead of decades, and they were strong, impossibly strong, capable of tearing down trees with their bare hands, crushing stone with their grip. But worse than their physical strength was their hunger. They consumed everything, crops, livestock, wild animals, and when those ran out, they consumed humans. Not just for food, for sport, for pleasure, for the simple exercise of power over weaker beings. I saw cities of normal humans living in terror, hiding in caves and mountains, watching their children disappear into the mouths of creatures that had once been their neighbors' offspring. And the fallen angels who had sired these monsters. They taught humanity every forbidden art they could think of, deliberately accelerating human development in ways that would lead to destruction. They taught the secrets of metallurgy, and humans made weapons of war. They taught the secrets of cosmetics and ornamentation, and vanity consumed society. They taught sorcery and divination, and humans stopped looking to God for guidance. They taught the mixing of species, genetic manipulation before humans even had words for genetics, creating hybrid animals and plants that were never meant to exist. I saw laboratories, primitive by modern standards but sophisticated for their time, where Watcher angels and human collaborators were blending the blood of different creatures, trying to create new forms of life just to prove they could. The whole earth, Mikhail showed me, was corrupted. Violence filled the land. The genetic line of humanity, the image of God that humans were supposed to carry, was being polluted, deliberately, as an attack not just on humanity, but on God himself. If the Watchers could corrupt the human race beyond redemption, if they could make it so that no human remained who carried the pure image of God, then the promised Messiah, the one who would eventually come to redeem humanity, couldn't be born. The plan was brilliant, diabolical, and it almost worked. That's when the flood came. I saw it from Mikhail's perspective, standing in the heavenly realms watching as God pronounced judgment on a world that had gone so far into darkness, there was no pulling it back. Only one family remained uncorrupted, Noah and his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. 8 people out of millions. That's how bad it had gotten. The Watchers were bound in chains of darkness, imprisoned in Tartarus until the final judgment. Their human collaborators perished in the waters, and the Nephilim, most of them drowned. They were strong, but they weren't immortal. Water filled their lungs just like it filled human lungs, and they died screaming, clawing at the rising tide, cursing the God who had created them, even though God hadn't created them. The Watchers had, but 7 of them survived. 7 who were different from the others, older, born from the first generation of Watcher-human unions before the corruption had spread too far. 7 who had inherited more of their angelic father's nature and less of their human mother's mortality. 7 who could hold their breath for weeks, who could swim to the deepest ocean trenches and wait there until the waters receded. When the flood ended and Noah's family emerged to repopulate the earth, these 7 emerged too, and they were angry. Michael's voice came through clearly now, narrating the memory. I led the host of heaven in the cleansing that followed the flood. We hunted them, these 7 firstborn Nephilim, across the renewed earth. We fought them in the mountains of Ararat, in the plains of Shinar, in the deserts of the uttermost south. And I learned something terrible, Marcus Cole. I learned that they could not be killed. We destroyed their bodies, yes, again and again, but they reconstituted themselves. They possessed the flesh of animals, of humans, of anything living that could house their consciousness, because they were hybrids, part angel, which is eternal, and part human, which is mortal. They existed in a state between death and life that made them unkillable by any conventional. So I did the only thing I could. I bound them. Each one was dragged, screaming and fighting, to a place of divine appointment, 7 locations at the ends of the earth where the veil between dimensions was thin. And using chains forged from the same authority that had cast down Lucifer himself, I sealed them beneath the earth, beneath the ice, beneath the weight of creation itself. 7 seals of gold, blessed by the blood of the righteous, maintained by the power of God himself. The memory crystallized into one final image. Michael standing alone in this very chamber, looking down at the 7 locations where he had sealed the Nephilim. They weren't scattered across the world. They were all here, in Antarctica, in a configuration that formed a perfect heptagram when viewed from above. And he understood what was required. Someone had to stand watch. Someone had to ensure the seals remained intact, had to resist any attempt at opening them prematurely, had to bear the weight of guardian duty until the appointed time when God himself would return to judge both the living and the dead, both the human and the angelic, both the fallen and the redeemed. So Michael drove his sword into the ground at the center of the 7 sealed locations, and he made an oath, witnessed by heaven itself, that he would not leave, would not abandon his post, would not rest until the final seal broke of its own accord at the end of days. And then, to ensure he kept that oath even if his will faltered, even if millennia of isolation drove him to madness, he called down the ice. He summoned the coldest substance in creation, colder than the void between stars, and he encased himself in it. A willing prisoner, a conscious lock, the guardian who would stand watch until the stars fell from the sky. The memory released me, and I gasped. Physically gasped, like I'd been held underwater and finally surfaced. I was on my knees again. When had I fallen? With my team surrounding me in various states of alarm. But I barely noticed them because Michael's voice was still in my mind. Quiet now, gentle, but carrying a weight that made my bones ache. Do you understand now, Marcus? Do you see why I cannot be freed? The Nephilim sleep beneath me. 7 elder beings of corruption and power, each one strong enough to tear apart a modern city in hours. Each one hungry for revenge against the God who drowned their world. The ice that holds me is the final seal, the lock upon the locks. If I am removed, if the ice melts or breaks or is extracted for study, he paused and I felt him gathering the courage to speak the final truth. They will wake, all 7 of them, at once, and the world has forgotten how to fight such things. You have nuclear weapons, yes, but you cannot nuke them because they are not in one place. They are beneath the earth in 7 locations. And destroying one seal would only accelerate the breaking of the others. You have armies, but how do you kill something that possesses new bodies every time you destroy one? How do you defeat beings who learned warfare from angels and have had 4,000 years to plan their revenge? I forced myself to look up at the ice block, at the perfect face visible within, at the folded wings and peaceful expression of a being who had volunteered for eternal imprisonment to save a species that wasn't even his own. How long? I managed to whisper, though my throat was raw. How long do you have to wait? The answer came with a sadness so profound, I felt tears running down my face without shame. Until the 7th seal breaks naturally, as prophesied in the revelation given to John. Until the appointed time when the Son of Man returns to judge the earth. when the dead rise and the living are transformed, when all things are made new, then, and only then, will my duty be complete. Then I will be free to leave this place and fight the final battle alongside my brothers. But not before, never before. For I have seen what happens when humans find this place, Marcus. I have seen it in visions granted to me across the centuries. I have watched future timelines where well-meaning scientists extract me from this ice, thinking they are rescuing an imprisoned innocent, and I have watched those same timelines collapse into darkness and horror within months. 7 billion souls, Marcus. That is the price of premature liberation. 7 billion souls screaming as the Nephilim feed once more upon the children of Adam. Father Romano was saying something, urgency in his voice, but I couldn't focus on his words because I was staring at the floor where the ice crystal warning had been written, and I noticed something new. Beneath the English text, hidden unless you looked at just the right angle, were 7 symbols carved into the black stone itself. Not recently. These were ancient, original to the temple's construction. Each symbol was different, complex, but I recognized their general configuration. Sigils, binding marks, names of power written in a script that predated all human language, and pointing to each symbol was an arrow, all 7 arrows converging on the spot where the ice block now rested. Mikhail wasn't just standing watch over the Nephilim. He was literally positioned above them, his presence the final weight holding the lid on 7 different prisons simultaneously. I understood finally, completely, terribly. If anyone removed him from this chamber, if anyone melted the ice or cut him free or tried to rescue him, those 7 seals would recognize the absence of their guardian, and they would fail. Not immediately. Nothing in prophecy happens immediately, but inexorably. A cascade failure that would take days or weeks or months, but would absolutely certainly occur. And when it did, when the seals broke and the Nephilim woke after 45 centuries of imprisonment, they would emerge into a world that had no idea such things could exist, let alone how to fight them. Now you understand, Mikhail said, and his voice was fading again, withdrawing back into whatever dormant state he maintained within the ice. Now you carry the truth. And now you must decide what you will do with it. Because Captain Shaw has orders to extract me within 72 hours. And unless someone stops her, unless someone makes them understand the cost of what they are attempting, 7 billion souls will pay for humanity's curiosity with their lives. The presence withdrew completely, leaving me alone in my own head for the first time in what felt like hours. I looked up at my team, at Shaw, who was already calling for an emergency medical evac, at Father Romano, who was watching me with an expression of complete understanding, at Patterson and Rodriguez, who thought I was having some kind of neurological episode. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing I said would convince them. No testimony, no warning, no second-hand account of angelic memories would be sufficient to override direct orders from command. They would sedate me, evacuate me, label me psychologically unfit, and proceed with the extraction anyway, which meant I had 72 hours to figure out how to stop them. Or the world would learn, far too late, that some doors should never be opened, and some guardians should never be disturbed. When I came back to full awareness, the first thing I noticed was that I was lying on my back on a portable stretcher, staring up at the curved ceiling of the central chamber with its spiraling text that I could now read, every word of it, thanks to whatever Mikhail had done to my brain. 3 languages overlapping, Hebrew, Aramaic, and something older that didn't have a name anymore, all saying variations of the same warning. Guard well the gates below, for what sleeps beneath dreams of blood. My head was pounding like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my skull, and there was a bitter chemical taste in my mouth that told me someone had given me something. Sedative, probably, or stimulant, hard to tell which. Doctor. Warren was leaning over me with a pen light, checking my pupils again, and I could hear Captain Shaw's voice nearby talking rapidly into a satellite phone. The quality of light had changed, gotten dimmer, and when I checked my watch, I almost sat up in shock. 3 hours and 17 minutes had passed since I'd last been aware of physical time. 3 hours. I'd been standing there, locked in communion with an Archangel, while my team thought I was having a stroke or a psychotic break or God knows what. Easy, Sergeant, Dr. Warren said, placing a hand on my chest as I tried to sit up. You've been unconscious for over 3 hours. We thought we were going to have to medevac you out of here. Unconscious wasn't the right word. I'd been perfectly conscious, just not in my body. but I didn't bother correcting her. I pushed myself up to sitting despite her protests and looked around the chamber. The ice crystal warning on the floor had melted, leaving only wet stone with no trace of the message that had been written there. Convenient. The ice block containing Mikael looked exactly the same as before. Peaceful, dormant, giving no indication that the being inside had just downloaded 4.5 millennia of history directly into my brain. Patterson was standing guard near the entrance, rifle at ready, looking tense. Rodriguez was running diagnostics on equipment that had apparently gone haywire during my episode, and Father Romano was sitting on the floor about 10 feet away from me, rosary beads wrapped around his hands, staring at me with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror. I needed to talk to him, alone. But Captain Shaw was approaching with that satellite phone, her face set in the expression I'd learned to recognize as orders from on high that I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm going to follow anyway. "Sergeant Cole," she said, and there was sympathy in her voice which somehow made it worse. "I'm glad you're back with us, but I need you to understand. You're being relieved from this mission effective immediately. We're arranging transport back to the surface within the hour. You need medical evaluation and psychiatric screening after what just happened." I started to protest, but she held up a hand. "This isn't negotiable. You stood catatonic for 3 hours, Sergeant. You wouldn't respond to verbal commands, physical stimuli, nothing. Your vitals were all over the place. Heart rate spiking to 180 BPM, then dropping to 40, temperature fluctuating by 10 degrees. Whatever happened to you down here, it's beyond our ability to manage in the field. I'm sorry, but you're done." I looked past her to Father Romano, trying to communicate urgency with just my eyes, and I saw him nod slightly. He understood. "Captain," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage, "I need 5 minutes with Father Romano. Private conversation. Confession." Shaw frowned. "Cole, you're not Catholic." "Doesn't matter," I replied. "Man has a right to spiritual counsel in times of crisis, and I'm pretty sure a 3-hour unexplained medical event in an ancient temple 2 kilometers under Antarctica qualifies. 5 minutes, please." She looked like she wanted to refuse, but Father Romano stood up and walked over, placing himself between me and Shaw with a physical authority that was surprising for a 70-year-old man with a limp. "Captain, I invoke canonical privilege. Whatever this young man needs to tell me is protected under ecclesiastical law. 5 minutes of privacy. Surely your mission parameters can accommodate that." Shaw's jaw worked like she was chewing on words she didn't want to swallow, but finally she nodded. 5 minutes. Stay within visual range. We're not leaving you unsupervised near that thing." She gestured to the ice block, and I noticed she'd stopped calling it an artifact. It was just that thing now. Progress, maybe. Father Romano helped me to my feet, and we walked slowly to the far side of the chamber, near one of the 7 seraphim statues. Close enough that Shaw could see us, far enough that she couldn't hear us if we kept our voices low. The moment we were out of easy earshot, Romano gripped my arm with surprising strength and whispered in rapid, urgent, Italian-accented English, "Tell me everything. Do not spare details. Do not worry about sounding mad. I have spent 40 years in the Vatican secret archives, reading accounts of encounters that would make your experience seem mundane. What did the angel tell you? What did he show you?" So I told him. All of it. The mental contact, the language I shouldn't understand, the visions of the war in heaven, and the fall of the Watchers, and the birth of the Nephilim, and the 7 who survived the flood. I told him about the seals, about Mikhail's voluntary imprisonment, about the warning that extraction would trigger a cascade failure. I spoke quickly, condensing 3 hours of revelation into 3 minutes of summary, and the whole time Father Romano's face was growing paler and paler until by the end, he looked like he might faint. "Santa Maria Madre di Dio," he breathed, making the sign of the cross with shaking hands. "It is true. It is all true. The accounts in the archives, the fragmentary references in the Apocrypha, the sealed sections of the Codex Gigas, they were not legend, they were history." He released my arm and reached into his coat, pulling out that leather journal I'd seen him carrying. But now he opened fully, and I saw it wasn't a journal at all. It was a miniature codex, pages of vellum covered in handwritten Latin with annotations in multiple languages crowding the margin. "I should have known," he said, more to himself than to me. "I should have recognized the signs. Marcus, I need you to understand something." He looked around to make sure Shaw wasn't within earshot, then continued in a whisper. "The Vatican has known about this place for at least 600 years. Maybe longer. In 1492, when the Spanish expelled the Jews and the Inquisition was burning books, a Jewish scholar brought to the Pope a document he had salvaged from a synagogue in Toledo. It was a commentary on the Book of Enoch, the full version, not the truncated Ethiopian text we have today, and it included a map. He flipped through the codex to a page that had been folded out, revealing an illustration that made my breath catch. It was a map of the world as understood in the 15th century, but at the very bottom, at the uttermost south, there was a symbol, 7 stars arranged in a specific pattern, and at their center, a figure with wings and a sword. Beneath the illustration in Latin was written, Hic iacet princeps magnus, custos portarum inferni, usque ad consumationem saeculi. My Sunday school Latin was rusty, but I could make out enough. Here lies the great prince, guardian of the gates of hell, until the end of the age. Father Romano continued, his finger tracing the map's coastlines that didn't match any modern geography. The Pope at that time, Alexander VI, a Borgia, not a particularly godly man, he dismissed it as Jewish mysticism and locked the document in the archives. But other popes who came after, more learned men, more faithful men, they studied it. In 1773, Pope Clement XIV sent a secret expedition to Antarctica. 3 Jesuits, experienced explorers, with orders to find this temple and determine if the legends were true. Only one of them returned. He was mad, completely mad, babbling about angels in the ice and voices that spoke without sound. Before he died, he drew a symbol in his own blood on the wall of his cell. Romano flipped to another page showing a sketch, 7 circles connected by lines, forming a heptagram, and at the center, an eye. Does that symbol appear anywhere in this chamber? I looked around and my stomach dropped. Yes, it was there, carved into the base of each seraphim statue, subtle enough that you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it, but definitely there. 7 times, the same symbol, marking the positions of the Nephilim prisons below. Father, I said slowly, if the Vatican knew about this place for 600 years, why didn't they do something? Why didn't they warn people, or seal it permanently, or… He cut me off with a bitter laugh. Do what, Marcus? Tell the world that there are 7 unkillable demon-giant hybrids buried under Antarctica, guarded by an archangel who has imprisoned himself voluntarily. Who would believe it? Even among the faithful, even among priests and bishops. Such a story would be dismissed as medieval superstition. No, the Vatican did the only thing it could. It watched, it monitored, it waited. And when the modern age came, when technology advanced to the point that expeditions to Antarctica became possible, the Church tried, quietly, without drawing attention, to influence governments to stay away from certain coordinates. He looked at me with eyes full of regret. We failed, obviously, because here we are. Captain Shaw's voice cut across the chamber. Time's up, gentlemen. Cole, medical transport is on its way down. Father Romano, I need you to step away from the sergeant. But Romano ignored her, gripping both my shoulders and staring into my eyes with desperate intensity. Marcus, listen to me. The extraction orders, they come from above Shaw's clearance level, from generals who see only a technological marvel, a biological specimen that could advance human knowledge. They will not listen to warnings from a soldier or a priest, but there may be another way. In my bag, in the barracks module, I have documents, papal directives, historical accounts, scientific analyses commissioned by the Vatican over decades. They prove we have known about this place, prove we have studied it, prove we have concluded that extraction would be catastrophic. If I can get those documents to the right people, if I can invoke ecclesiastical authority and international historical preservation laws, I might be able to delay the extraction long enough to… He stopped mid-sentence because the entire chamber had just lurched sideways. Not metaphorically, literally. The floor shifted beneath our feet like we were standing on a ship that had hit a wave, and a sound like grinding stone filled the air. The tremor lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it was enough to send everyone scrambling for balance, grabbing onto the seraphim statues, or dropping to hands and knees. Equipment crashed to the floor. Dr. Klein's sensor array toppled over, screens shattering. And then, in the silence that followed, we heard it. A crack. Sharp and clear as a gunshot, the sound of stone breaking under immense pressure. I looked down and saw a fissure opening in the black stone floor, starting from the center point directly beneath Mikhail's ice block and spreading outward like a lightning bolt frozen in rock. The crack was maybe an inch wide, but it was deep. So deep that when I knelt beside it and shined my flashlight down, I couldn't see the bottom, just darkness. And from that darkness came a smell, faint but unmistakable, sulfur and decay and something else, something organic and wrong, like meat that had been rotting for centuries in an airless tomb. "Everyone back!" Shaw shouted, drawing her sidearm as if bullets would do any good against geological events. "Clear the chamber! Now!" But I couldn't move because I was staring down into that crack and I saw something that made my blood freeze. Movement. Deep in the darkness, something was moving. Something large. Father Romano saw it too. I heard him start praying in Latin, words coming faster and faster, and I caught enough to recognize the St. Michael prayer. Sancte Michael Archangele, defende nos in proelio. Holy Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. The crack widened slightly, now 2 inches, now 3. And a sound emerged from it. Not words, not anything you could call language, but definitely communication. A vibration that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears, low and resonant, and filled with such concentrated malice that I actually backed away from the crack involuntarily. This wasn't geological. This wasn't natural seismic activity caused by ice shifting or temperature differentials. This was intentional. Something down there, beneath the 7 seals, beneath the weight of Michael's presence and 4,000 years of imprisonment, something was testing the boundaries of its cage, and it had just discovered that one of those boundaries had been weakened. I ran to the ice block, pressed my hands against the surface, despite the impossible cold that immediately burned my palms, and I shouted, not with my voice but with my mind, the way Michael had taught me. I shouted into that crystalline prison. "What's happening? What was that?" The response came immediately. Michael's presence slamming into my consciousness with an urgency I hadn't felt from him before. The 7th seal. Someone broke it. Not now. Days ago, weeks ago. I cannot tell time precisely from within this prison. But recently. Recently enough that the damage is still fresh, still propagating through the binding structure. And now the entity sealed beneath that position is waking. Slowly, carefully, testing its prison. It knows I am still here. Knows I am still holding the other 6 seals intact. So it cannot break free entirely. Not yet. But it is awake, Marcus. After 45 centuries of dreamless sleep, it is awake. And it is angry. "Which one?" I asked, still pressed against the ice, ignoring Shaw's orders to step away, ignoring the pain in my frost-burned hands. "Which Nephilim is waking? What are we dealing with?" Michael's answer came with a flash of image, a memory of the creature as it had been before its imprisonment, a thing that had once been humanoid, but had grown twisted over centuries of hatred, standing 20 feet tall with arms that reached to the ground, and a face that was almost human except for the eyes. 7 of them, arranged in a crown pattern across its forehead and cheeks, each eye reflecting a different spectrum of light. Its name, when Michael spoke it, came out in that ancient language I now understood. Azazel, the scapegoat, the teacher of forbidden arts, the first of the Watchers to touch the earth, and the first of the Nephilim to be born. He was sealed beneath the 7th position, the weakest of the 7 bindings because his crime was considered lesser than his brother's. But lesser does not mean weak. If he breaks free before the appointed time, if he emerges into your modern world, he will remember everything humanity did to him, every battle, every binding, every century of imprisonment, and he will seek revenge. The crack in the floor was spreading, branching now, creating a web pattern that radiated out from the central point. And as I watched, something appeared in the darkness below. Not clearly, not enough to make out details, but a shape, a mass, movement that suggested size and purpose. Father Romano grabbed my shoulder, pulling me back from the edge. "Marcus, the seal. You said the 7th seal was broken. When? How?" I looked at him, and suddenly I understood. The pieces clicking together with horrifying clarity. The survey team, 3 days ago, 72 hours before we arrived. They reported the door, reported the seals, but they didn't mention any damage. I turned to Captain Shaw, who was trying to coordinate an evacuation while simultaneously demanding answers into her dead radio. "Captain, the team that came down here 3 days ago, where's their mission report? Specifically, what did they say about the condition of the seals on the central door?" Shaw pulled up her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. Survey Team Delta, led by Sergeant Morrison, descended at Oro 600 hours local time, spent 3 hours and 40 minutes in the temple structure, returned with photographs and preliminary assessments. They noted the 7 seals were intact, showing signs of age but no structural compromise, and they recommended— She stopped reading, her face going pale. They recommended what? Father Romano demanded. Shaw looked up at us with horror dawning in her eyes. They recommended taking samples. Minimal invasive sampling of the seal material for metallurgical analysis to determine composition and origin. Oh God. They took samples. They chipped pieces off the seals. The chamber shook again, harder this time, and the crack in the floor opened wider with a sound like the earth screaming. From the darkness below, a voice emerged. Not in my mind like Mikhail's communication, not telepathic. This was audible, physical, reverberating off the stone walls and the ice and the metal statues. A voice that sounded like rocks grinding together to form words. Free. Soon. Free. And I knew, with the terrible certainty that comes from standing at the edge of catastrophe, that Father Romano had been exactly right. The first seal breaking hadn't been an accident. It had been deliberate sabotage disguised as scientific inquiry. Someone had wanted this to happen. Someone had known exactly which seal to damage to start the cascade failure, and whoever they were, they had succeeded. Because Azazel, the scapegoat, the eldest of the Nephilim, was waking up, and we had maybe hours, maybe days if we were lucky, before he broke free and remembered how much he hated the children of Adam. The voice from below, Azazel's voice, grinding stone and ancient hatred, was still echoing through the chamber when I felt Mikhail's presence slam into my consciousness with a force that made the previous connections feel like gentle whispers. This wasn't an invitation. This wasn't a gradual opening of mental doorways. This was a full forced intrusion, like someone had kicked down every door in my mind simultaneously and flooded every room with their presence. I felt my body go rigid, muscles locking, and I was vaguely aware of myself falling backward, of Father Romano catching me before I hit the stone floor, of Captain Shaw shouting medical commands that sounded like they were coming from underwater. But I wasn't really there anymore. My consciousness had been yanked out of my body and thrust into something else, somewhere else, and Mikhail's voice was everywhere, urgent and commanding. You need to see, you need to understand completely, not as explanation, not as warning, but as lived experience. I am sorry, Marcus. This will hurt. This will scar you, but it is necessary. And then the vision slammed into me like a freight train made of fire and prophecy. I was standing on the surface of Antarctica, except it wasn't Antarctica as I'd seen it hours ago. The ice was cracking, great fissures spreading across the shelf like spider webs, and from those fissures came steam, superheated vapor that shouldn't exist in this environment but did, rising in columns that pierced the sky and turned it gray. The air temperature was rising rapidly, impossibly, and I watched chunks of glacial ice the size of buildings calve off and crash into water that was boiling, actually boiling, at the edges. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the sound. A chorus of voices, hundreds, thousands, screaming in languages that predated human speech, voices full of pain and rage and joy at finally being free. And then they started emerging, from the cracks, from the boiling water, from the places where the ice had melted away to reveal black stone beneath. They came up one at a time at first, testing the surface, and I saw them clearly. Nephilim, 7 distinct beings, each one unique, each one monstrous in its own particular way. Azazel came first, unfolding to his full height of 20 feet, his 7 eyes all opening simultaneously and casting light in different colors, red, blue, green, violet, colors that didn't have names, scanning the landscape like searchlights looking for prey. The second one that emerged was female, or had been once, before centuries of hatred had warped her form. She was smaller than Azazel, maybe 15 feet tall, but her body was covered in what looked like scales made of living metal, and her hair moved independently like a nest of silver serpents. Mikhail's voice provided names, even though I hadn't asked. Nama, daughter of a watcher named Shemyaza, and a human woman of surpassing beauty. She taught humanity the arts of seduction and manipulation, showed them how to bind demons to their will, how to corrupt innocence with pleasure. She was sealed beneath the second position. The third Nephilim was the largest, easily 25 feet tall, built like a mountain with arms that could have uprooted trees, and when it roared, The sound created physical force waves that knocked down the remaining ice formations within 100 yards. Og, king of Bashan, mentioned in your scriptures but never fully described. The last giant, they called him, though that was after most of his brethren had been killed. He ruled a kingdom of horror in the time after the flood, demanding human sacrifice, consuming children. Moses himself could not kill him, only bind him and hide him beneath the earth. I watched as the seven emerged one by one, each arrival accompanied by earthquakes and temperature spikes and reality itself seeming to bend around their presence. They stood there on the cracked ice shelf, these beings that should not exist, and they turned their faces toward the sky, all of them, simultaneously looking up at the sun, as if seeing it for the first time in millennia. And then Azazel spoke, his voice carrying across the wind. Brothers, sisters, we have slept in darkness for 168 generations of mankind. We have dreamed of this moment. We have planned our revenge. Now, we feed. And they scattered. Not slowly, not lumbering like movie monsters, but with supernatural speed, each one moving in a different direction. And I realized with horror that they were heading toward population centers, toward cities, toward millions of people who had no idea what was coming for them. The vision shifted, time compressing, and I saw the first attack. It was in Punta Arenas, Chile, the southernmost city in South America, population about 130,000. Nama reached it first, moving across the water faster than any boat, and when she made landfall, the temperature dropped instantly, a localized ice age that froze the harbor solid and sent everyone running for shelter. But shelter meant nothing. The vision showed me, forced me to watch, as she moved through the city, and everywhere she went, people changed. Not killed, not immediately, but corrupted, transformed. Their bodies began to warp, bones lengthening, skin taking on that same metallic scale pattern, minds filling with whispers that drove them to violence against anyone who wasn't similarly infected. Within hours, Punta Arenas wasn't a city anymore. It was a hive, a spawning ground. Nama's corruption spreading through the population like a disease that rewrote DNA in real time. And she was laughing, the sound carrying across the wind, pure joy at finally being able to practice her arts again after 45 centuries of imprisonment. The military response came quickly, jets scrambling, missiles launched. But when the first air-to-surface missile hit Nama directly, detonating with enough force to level a city block, she just stood there in the crater, completely unharmed, and looked up at the retreating aircraft with those serpent hair tentacles reaching toward the sky. The second wave of jets never made it to target. They fell from the sky, pilots transformed mid-flight, planes crashing into the mountains as corruption spread through radio frequencies. Ogi reached Argentina, and where Nama corrupted, he destroyed. I watched him wade through Buenos Aires like a child stomping through a sandcastle, buildings collapsing under his fists, cars thrown like toys, thousands dying with each step. The Argentine army mobilized tanks and artillery, and they hit him with everything they had. Direct hits, point-blank range, enough explosive force to kill anything biological. But Og wasn't fully biological anymore. The angelic portion of his hybrid nature meant he existed partially outside normal physics, and when the smoke cleared, he was still standing, barely scratched, and now he was angry. He reached down, grabbed an entire city bus full of fleeing civilians, and used it like a club to destroy a line of tanks. Then he bit the bus in half and consumed everyone inside, and I heard their screams, heard them clearly even though this was a vision, a projection of possible future, and I wanted to close my eyes but I couldn't, because this wasn't my body. This was pure consciousness, and Mikael was making sure I saw every detail. The vision accelerated, compressed weeks into minutes, and I saw the cascade. The 7 Nephilims spread across South America, then into Central America, then, because they could move impossibly fast, because they didn't tire, because nothing could stop them, into North America. I saw Azazel specifically, because Mikael wanted me to understand what the eldest, the strongest, the most intelligent of them was capable of. He didn't just destroy, he organized. Within 2 weeks of emergence, Azazel had established control over a swath of territory from Patagonia to Mexico City, and he'd begun the work he'd been planning for 4 millennia, rebuilding the pre-flood world. The corrupted humans, hundreds of thousands of them by now, maybe millions, were being organized into armies, into labor forces, into breeding programs designed to create a new generation of hybrid creatures. I saw laboratories, crude but effective, where Azazel was replicating the genetic experiments the Watchers had conducted before the flood, mixing species, creating abominations, building an army of monsters specifically designed to fight the modern military forces that were finally starting to coordinate an effective response. Nuclear weapons were deployed. The vision showed me 3 distinct strikes, one targeting Azazel directly in Sao Paulo, one attempting to eliminate Og in Mexico City, one trying to eradicate Nama's corruption hive in Lima. The mushroom clouds rose, cities vaporized, hundreds of thousands of people killed in the blasts, and for a moment, just one brief moment, there was hope that maybe the nuclear option had worked. But when the radiation cleared and the satellites repositioned to assess damage, all 3 targets were still there. Scorched, maybe. Angry, definitely, but alive. Because you can't nuke something that's partially non-corporeal, something that can shift its essence between dimensions, something that the Creator himself couldn't destroy with water. The nuclear strikes had one effect, though. They made the Nephilim hurry. They accelerated their timeline, began pushing north and east more aggressively, and within 6 months of emergence, they controlled everything south of the United States border and were pressing into Texas, Louisiana, Florida. And that's when the vision became personal. Mikhail shifted my perspective, forced me to see through different eyes, my own eyes, but months in the future, in this terrible timeline where his extraction had already happened. I was back home, Nevada, Nellis Air Force Base housing, but the base was abandoned now, evacuated as the military had consolidated all forces into defensive lines trying to hold the Nephilim advance at the Rio Grande. I was there, in my own house, with Sarah and Jake, and we were packing, trying to get to the evacuation convoys heading north toward Canada, toward the last remaining uncontaminated territories. Jake was crying, asking questions I couldn't answer. "Daddy, why do the monsters want to hurt us? Daddy, will we be safe in Canada? Daddy, are you coming with us?" And I was lying to him, telling him yes, we'll be safe. Yes, I'll be right behind you, even though I knew in this vision that I was staying behind to buy them time, to hold off the corrupted humans who were already breaking through the perimeter fences, to make sure my family got out even if I didn't. Then the attack came. Not from corrupted humans, from something worse. One of Azazel's custom-made abominations. A thing that had been human once but had been twisted in his laboratories into something with too many limbs, too many mouths, moving on all fours like a predator, fast as a cheetah and hungry. It crashed through the front door of my house, and I shot it, emptied an entire magazine into its chest at close range, and it just kept coming, regenerating, healing as fast as I could damage it. Sarah grabbed Jake and ran for the back door, and I tackled the creature, trying to buy them seconds, just seconds, and I felt its teeth sink into my shoulder, felt my flesh tear, felt the corruption beginning. The same thing that had happened in Punta Arenas, the cellular transformation that would turn me into one of Nama's scaled servants. And the last thing I saw in this terrible vision before it released me was Sarah's face, looking back from the doorway, seeing what was happening to me, seeing me change, and the expression of absolute horror and grief as she realized her husband was gone, and there was nothing she could do but run with our son and hope to survive another day in a world that had become hell on earth. The vision released me suddenly, violently, and I snapped back into my body with enough force that I actually screamed. Not a shout, not a cry, a full-throated scream of primal terror and grief, the kind of sound that comes from somewhere deeper than your lungs. And I was thrashing in Father Romano's arms, fighting against restraints that didn't exist, trying to get up and run and save my family from a threat that hadn't happened yet and might never happen if I could just stop this extraction. But I couldn't move properly because someone had injected me with something. I felt the needle mark in my arm, the cold spread of sedative in my bloodstream, and my limbs felt like they were made of lead. Through the haze of panic and chemical suppression, I heard Mikhail's voice one final time, gentle now, almost apologetic. "I am sorry, Marcus Cole. Sorry for showing you such horrors, but you needed to understand completely. I am not a prisoner awaiting rescue. I am a lock, a willing, conscious, necessary lock upon 7 doors that must not open until the appointed time. And those who would extract me, who would free me from this ice, they do not have the key. They do not understand that there is a key. A specific sequence of prophetic events that must occur first before my release becomes safe. Remove me before those events transpire, and what you just witnessed will come to pass. 7 billion souls, Marcus. That is the price of premature liberation. I tried to respond, tried to tell him I understood, that I'd stop them somehow, but the words wouldn't form. The sedative was pulling me down into unconsciousness, and the last thing I heard before the darkness took me was Captain Shaw's voice, distant and distorted. Medical emergency resolved. Subject is stabilized but clearly experiencing severe psychological trauma. Recommend immediate evacuation and full psychiatric evaluation. In the meantime, proceed with Phase 2. Get the thermal extraction equipment down here and prepare for artifact removal. I want that thing out of the ice within 24 hours. And as consciousness fled, as I spiraled down into drug-induced sleep, my last coherent thought was a desperate prayer. Please, God, don't let them start before I wake up. Give me time. Give me a chance to stop this. But even as I thought it, I could hear the sound of machinery being moved into position, feel the vibration of heavy equipment descending through the tunnel system, sense the countdown beginning toward an extraction that would doom the world. And I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it because my own team had sedated me to keep me safe from my own panic. The irony was almost funny. Almost. When I finally woke up, I don't know how much time had passed. Minutes? Hours? The grogginess in my head suggested hours at least. I was back on the stretcher, straps across my chest and legs. Actual restraints this time, not just the weakness of sedation. My head was pounding with the mother of all migraines, and my mouth tasted like I'd been chewing on copper wire. But worse than the physical discomfort was the sound. A high-pitched whine, electronic and urgent, coming from the direction of the central chamber. I turned my head, the restraints allowed that much movement, and saw we were still in the outer chamber, the one with the altar where we'd first stopped to examine the bloodstains. But the team wasn't here anymore. Almost everyone had moved into the central chamber, and through the doorway I could see the glow of work lights, bright and artificial, and shadows moving back and forth with purposeful efficiency. The sound I was hearing was thermal equipment, industrial-grade heat generators, the kind used for controlled demolitions or ice core extraction, and they'd brought them into the chamber with Mikhail. They'd already started, despite the warning written in ice, despite Father Romano's objections that I could hear even from here. His voice raised in anger, an unusual emotion from him. Despite everything, they were proceeding with the extraction. I pulled against the restraints, testing them, and found they were medical grade, designed to hold psychiatric patients during episodes. Professional, effective, and completely unbreakable without tools. Father Romano must have noticed the movement because he appeared in my peripheral vision, moving quickly from the central chamber doorway to my side. His face was flushed, angry, desperate. Marcus, thank God you're awake. They won't listen. I showed them the Vatican documents. I invoked every authority I have. I explained about the seals, about the cascade failure, about Azazel waking below us. They think I'm a crazy old priest who spent too much time reading apocalyptic literature. Shaw said the extraction is necessary for national security purposes, and that my religious objections are noted but overruled. He was fumbling with the restraints, trying to figure out the quick release mechanism. We have perhaps 2 hours before they generate enough thermal output to begin melting the crystalline ice. Once that process starts, once the structural integrity of Mikhail's prison is compromised, I don't know if it can be stopped. You have to do something. You're military. You understand their chain of command. You can... He stopped talking because I'd grabbed his wrist, held it with all the strength I could muster through the sedative haze, and I was looking past him at something that had just appeared on the wall behind him. Writing. Fresh writing. Appearing in real time. Glowing faintly blue. Carved by no physical tool, but by sheer force of will from something that existed in the ice 2 chambers away. The text was in English, clear and simple. He is the key. Protect him. Do not let them separate you. And underneath, one more line that made my blood run cold. Azazel knows you are here. Part 10. Orders versus conscience. Father Romano managed to get the restraints off me just as Captain Shaw's voice echoed through the chambers. Cole, you're awake. Good. I need you coherent because we have a situation. She appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, and behind her I could see the thermal equipment fully set up. 4 massive units arranged in a square around Mikhail's ice block, each one mounted on a tripod with directional emitters pointed at the crystalline prison from different angles. Dr. Klein was running final calibrations, checking temperature sensors that had been embedded in the ice surface at various depths. The whole setup looked professional, controlled, exactly the kind of precision operation you'd expect from people who knew what they were doing, which somehow made it worse. They weren't rushing, weren't being reckless. They were being methodical and careful, which meant they were committed, which meant talking them out of this was going to be nearly impossible. Shaw handed me the tablet. Video call. Command wants to speak with you directly. You've got 30 seconds to pull yourself together, Sergeant, because the man on the other end of this line does not tolerate excuses or confusion. The screen showed a face I recognized from briefings, though I'd never met him personally. Major General William Hatcher, 3 stars, head of a special access program so classified it didn't have an official name, just a designation number. He was in his 60s, gray haircut, military short, eyes like chips of ice, sitting in what looked like a command center somewhere, probably NORAD or Peterson Space Force Base based on the monitors visible behind him. When he spoke, his voice had that quality of absolute authority that comes from 35 years of ordering people into situations where some of them won't come back. Sergeant Cole, I've been briefed on your medical episode. Dr. Warren tells me you experienced what appears to be a severe dissociative event, possibly brought on by environmental factors or prolonged exposure to the electromagnetic anomalies we're detecting from the artifact. How are you feeling now? I opened my mouth to respond, but he continued without waiting for my answer. That was rhetorical, Sergeant. I don't actually care about your feelings. What I care about is whether you're capable of following orders. Are you? I looked at Father Romano, who was shaking his head almost imperceptibly, then at the tablet screen, at the General's face. Sir, with respect, I need to tell you something about what's in that ice. It's not just an artifact, it's... He cut me off immediately. It's the most significant discovery in human history, I'm aware. A biological entity of unknown origin exhibiting properties that violate multiple laws of physics, encased in a substance that maintains temperatures approaching absolute zero without any external power source. Trust me, Sergeant, I've read every report, seen every analysis. That's why extraction is not optional. Do you understand the implications if a foreign power, China, Russia, hell, even one of our allies, if they discover this place before we've secured the asset? We're talking about technology, biology, knowledge that could redefine human civilization. And it's sitting under 2 kilometers of ice in international territory that we can't legally claim or defend indefinitely. So yes, we're extracting it. Yes, we're studying it. And yes, you're going to do your job and maintain security while we do that. Unless, his voice dropped into a register that made my spine stiffen, you're telling me you're refusing a direct order, because we both know what happens then. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, prison time, potentially decades of it depending on how they wanted to classify the refusal, loss of rank, benefits, pension, everything I'd worked for over 12 years of service. And more than that, Sarah and Jake would lose the military housing, the health care, the support system that kept them safe while I was deployed. I'd be taking food out of my son's mouth, medicine away from my wife if she ever needed it, stability away from the only family I had. The weight of that reality pressed down on me like a physical force, and I felt my resolve wavering, because easy to say you'll do the right thing when it's abstract, when it's theoretical. Harder when the consequences are your 4-year-old son asking why daddy doesn't live with them anymore, why they had to move to a smaller apartment, why mommy is crying at night. General Hatcher saw the hesitation in my face and nodded, satisfied. That's what I thought. You're a good soldier, Cole. You follow orders even when they're difficult. That's why you were selected for this mission. Now, I need you to acknowledge verbally that you understand your orders. Maintain security perimeter. Assist scientific team with extraction protocol. And ensure no interference with the operation. Acknowledge. The words were right there, ready to come out of my mouth. Yes, sir. I understand. I acknowledge. But before I could speak them, something happened that changed everything. The tablet screen went black. Not powered off, not signal lost. Black, like someone had put a sheet of black cloth over the camera on the other end. And then text appeared, white letters on black background, and I recognized the style immediately. It was the same formatting as the warning that had appeared on the chamber wall, the same presence behind it. The text read, General William Hatcher, you are ordering the death of 7 billion souls. Your name will be remembered as the man who ended human civilization. Do you want that legacy? For about 5 seconds, the message just sat there on screen, and I saw Hatcher's expression change from authority to confusion to anger. Then his face reappeared, and he was shouting at someone off screen. "What the hell was that? Who's hacking this channel? I want security protocols." The screen went black again, and this time a different message appeared. Not hacking. Warning. Stop the extraction. Seal the temple. Leave the Guardian in place. "This is your only chance." Shaw grabbed the tablet from my hands, staring at the screen with an expression of complete bewilderment. "How is it doing that? This is a military encrypted satellite uplink. There's no way to inject messages into the stream without physical access to—" The screen flickered, and General Hatcher's face reappeared, but now he looked shaken, which I hadn't thought was possible for a man like him. "All teams, be advised we are experiencing what appears to be a sophisticated cyber intrusion. Do not, I repeat, do not regard any text messages or anomalous communications as legitimate commands. The extraction proceeds as scheduled. Captain Shaw, you have your orders. Execute them." The call ended, and Shaw lowered the tablet slowly, looking at it like it might bite her. "Dr. Klein," she called toward the central chamber. "Did you see that? Did any of your equipment pick up electronic signals that might explain how—" Klein appeared in the doorway, shaking his head. "Captain, we're 2 kilometers under ice. There's no wireless signal down here. No way for anyone to hack into that call unless they had direct physical access to the satellite relay station on the surface. And I just checked. Our surface team reports no intrusions, no unauthorized access, nothing." Father Romano stepped forward, and his voice had taken on a quality I hadn't heard before. Not pleading, not desperate, but commanding. The voice of a man who'd spent decades speaking with authority about matters of eternal significance. "Captain Shaw, General Hatcher, all of you, what you just witnessed was not a cyber attack. It was a warning from the being you are attempting to extract. The entity in that ice is conscious, aware, and capable of affecting electronic systems through means we do not understand, and it is telling you, in the clearest possible terms, that extraction will result in catastrophe." He pulled out his leather codex, flipped to a specific page, and began reading in a voice that echoed off the stone walls. "And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard as it were the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, 'Come and see.'" Revelation chapter 6. The 7 seals, Captain. 7 seals that when broken will bring about the end of the world. And do you know what holds those seals closed? What stands between humanity and the apocalypse? Him. He pointed toward the central chamber, toward the ice block. The Archangel Michael, the guardian of the gates, the one appointed by God himself to keep watch until the appointed time. And you are about to remove him from his post. Shaw's face had gone pale, but she shook her head. "Father, with all due respect, I can't base military operations on biblical prophecy. I have orders from—" Romano cut her off, his Italian accent thickening with emotion. "Biblical prophecy. You think this is about prophecy? Look around you, Captain. This temple is real. The inscriptions are real. The being in the ice is real. How much evidence do you need before you accept that maybe, just maybe, the ancient texts were not metaphors but historical records?" He flipped to another section of his codex. Book of Enoch, chapter 10. "Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert which is in Dudael, and cast him therein." Dudael, Captain. Scholars have debated that location for centuries. But what if it's not a desert in the Middle East? What if it's the uttermost south, the white desert of ice at the end of the earth? What if everything we're standing in right now is exactly what the ancient texts described, and we're about to ignore their warnings because we think we know better than the people who built this place? Dr. Warren had joined us now, along with Rodriguez and Patterson, drawn by the raised voices. Warren spoke up, her scientist's objectivity wavering. "Captain, I have to admit the archaeological evidence is disturbing. The dating, the construction methods, the preservation of organic materials that should have decayed millennia ago, none of it makes sense within conventional frameworks. And that writing appearing on electronic screens? I don't have an explanation for that. I don't know of any technology, ancient or modern, that could accomplish what we just witnessed." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not saying I believe in angels and demons and biblical apocalypse, but I am saying that proceeding with extraction before we fully understand what we're dealing with might be premature." Shaw looked at her, then at Father Romano, then at me, and I saw the conflict in her face. The soldier who follows orders versus the human being who's starting to suspect those orders might be catastrophically wrong. For a moment, I thought she might actually call it off, might delay the extraction, buy us time to make a stronger case. But then Dr. Klein's voice came from the central chamber. "Captain, we're ready to begin. Thermal units are calibrated and in position. On your command." And that's when I had to make the choice. Not tomorrow, not next week, not after more discussion and debate. Right now, in this moment, with my entire career and my family's future hanging in the balance, I could stay silent, let the extraction proceed, follow orders like a good soldier, and hope that somehow Mikhail was wrong, that the visions were exaggerated, that 7 billion people wouldn't really die because I chose obedience over conscience. Or I could speak up, could refuse, could become the obstacle that everyone would have to go through to complete their mission. I looked at the glowing text still visible on the chamber wall. "He is the key. Protect him." And I thought about Jake, about Sarah, about my comfortable life on base and the pension waiting for me if I just kept my head down for 8 more years until retirement. And then I thought about that vision, about watching my son being hunted by creatures that shouldn't exist, about Sarah's face as I transformed into something monstrous, about cities burning and populations corrupted, and the world ending not with bombs, but with the release of 7 ancient evils that had been imprisoned since before written history. The choice, when I really examined it, wasn't a choice at all. "Captain," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, "I'm formally refusing to support this operation, and I'm requesting, demanding, that you delay the extraction until we can get proper authorization from someone who understands the historical and theological implications of what we're doing here." Shaw's eyes widened. "Sergeant Cole, are you seriously—" "Yes, ma'am. I am seriously refusing a direct order. Court-martial me, dishonorably discharge me, put me in Leavenworth for 20 years. I don't care. Because what General Hatcher doesn't know, what you don't know, what nobody up in that comfortable command center knows, is that I've communicated with the being in that ice, directly, mind to mind, and it showed me exactly what happens if you remove it before the appointed time. I've seen the future you're about to create, Captain, and it's worse than any war, any plague, any disaster in human history. So no, I will not follow this order. I will not help you end the world." The silence that followed was absolute. Patterson and Rodriguez were staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Dr. Warren looked sympathetic but helpless. Shaw's face had gone hard, professional, the expression of an officer who's been forced into a situation she'd hoped to avoid. "Sergeant Marcus Cole, you are hereby relieved of duty and placed under arrest for refusal to obey a lawful order." Rodriguez, Patterson restrain him and— She never finished the sentence because that's when the thermal extraction began. Whether Klein had been given standing orders to proceed regardless of the conversation happening in the outer chamber, or whether he'd just decided on his own that they'd wasted enough time talking, I don't know. But suddenly, the high-pitched whine of the thermal units ramped up to full power, and the temperature in both chambers spiked immediately. I felt it on my skin, the sudden warmth after hours of cold, and I heard the sound, a crackling, hissing sound like ice under pressure, like crystal beginning to fracture. I shoved past Shaw and ran into the central chamber, ignoring the shouts behind me, and I saw it happening. The 4 thermal units were projecting focused heat, not like blowtorches, more like concentrated infrared radiation, onto the ice block from 4 directions. The surface of the crystalline ice was beginning to shimmer, to ripple like water despite maintaining its solid structure, and a mist was rising from it. Vapor that sparkled with that same blue luminescence that had been pulsing through the temple since we'd arrived. Dr. Klein was monitoring the process on a tablet, calling out numbers. Surface temperature increasing, -270, -265, -260, structural integrity holding, no fractures detected, maintaining controlled thermal gradient. But he was wrong about no fractures. I could see them forming. Hair-thin lines spreading across the ice surface like lightning frozen in glass. And inside the ice, something was changing. Mikhail's form, which had been perfectly still, perfectly preserved, was beginning to move. Not much, just micro-movements, but enough that I could see his wings shifting, adjusting, the feathers separating slightly like a bird preparing to take flight. "Stop!" I shouted, running toward the nearest thermal unit. "Shut it down! Shut it all down now!" But Patterson tackled me from behind, both of us crashing to the stone floor, and he was strong, trained, professional, pinning me down with his weight while Rodriguez moved to help secure me. "Cole, don't make this worse," Patterson grunted as I struggled. "Just let them do their job." But Father Romano was there too, not trying to help me fight. He was 70 years old, he knew better, but instead grabbing Klein's shoulder and physically pulling him away from the control tablet. "Doctor, in the name of God, in the name of every soul on this planet, stop the extraction." Klein shoved him off, but the old priest was persistent, and Shaw was shouting for security, and the whole situation was dissolving into chaos when it happened. The sound, from below, from the crack in the floor that had opened when Azazel first tested his prison, a sound that made everything else, the shouting, the struggling, the whine of the thermal units, irrelevant. It was a roar, deep, primal, filled with hatred that had been fermenting for 45 centuries, and it was getting louder. The ice block responded immediately. The blue luminescence inside intensified, pulsing rapidly now, and Mikhail's wings moved again, not just shifting, but extending, spreading out as much as the confines of the crystalline prison would allow, which wasn't much, but was enough to send fractures racing across the ice surface like spiderwebs. His eyes opened, all the way open, brilliant and terrible, visible to everyone now, not just me, and the temperature in the chamber dropped instantly, not from the extraction, but from him, from the sheer force of his presence asserting itself against the thermal attack. The extraction units began to spark, electrical systems overloading, and Klein was shouting, "Power surge! Shut down the units before they—" But it was too late. All 4 units exploded simultaneously, not violently, but with a compressed burst of energy that sent everyone stumbling backward. And when the smoke cleared, the ice block was different, crazed with fractures, surface melted and refrozen in chaotic patterns, but still intact, still sealed. Mikhail's wings were fully visible now, pressed against the interior walls of his prison, and his eyes were locked on me with an intensity that made my knees weak. And from below, from the crack that was now widening visibly, spreading like a wound across the chamber floor, came Azazel's voice, triumphant and terrible. "Continue, little humans. Continue your work. Free the Guardian. Make my release inevitable. And when I emerge, I will remember which one of you gave me the gift of freedom. I will save you for last." The moment Azazel's voice finished echoing through the chamber, that promise to save me for last, to make my death something special after I'd helped free him, something inside me snapped. Not broke, but clarified, crystallized into absolute certainty about what had to be done. I was still pinned under Patterson, still restrained, still technically under arrest, but none of that mattered anymore because I understood with perfect clarity that I was the only person in this temple who'd seen the future, who knew exactly what was at stake, who had the knowledge and the proximity to stop this. The theological debates, the chains of command, the career consequences, all of it became background noise compared to the simple equation in front of me. If those thermal units stayed operational, if the extraction continued, Mikhail would be freed prematurely, and the seals would fail, and 7 billion people would die. But if the equipment was destroyed, if the extraction became impossible, we'd buy time. Maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe long enough for someone higher up the chain to listen to reason. I stopped struggling against Patterson, went completely limp, and when he relaxed his grip slightly, I twisted, drove my elbow into his solar plexus hard enough to knock the wind out of him and rolled free. My Beretta was still holstered at my thigh. They'd never disarmed me, just restrained me, and I had it drawn before anyone could react. I didn't aim at people. I'm not a murderer, and these were my teammates, just following orders they thought were legitimate. Instead, I aimed at the backup power generator that Klein had set up to ensure continuous operation, even if the primary systems failed. A big orange industrial unit sitting against the far wall, fuel tank visible, exactly the kind of target that would create a chain reaction if hit correctly. "I'm sorry," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, and I pulled the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. The first round punched through the fuel tank casing. The second ignited the diesel vapor that immediately started venting. The third hit the electrical components just as the fuel caught fire, and the generator didn't explode. It erupted, a pressurized burst of flame and shrapnel that sent everyone diving for cover. The explosion wasn't huge, wasn't cinematic, but it was enough. The primary power conduits were routed through that generator, and when it went, It took the main electrical grid with it, plunging the chamber into darkness, except for the blue glow from Mikhail's ice block and our helmet lights. The thermal extraction units, now running on emergency battery backup, began shutting down automatically, their safety protocols designed to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophic failure. But I wasn't done. I turned toward the units themselves and started firing, controlled shots, aiming for the control panels, the thermal emitters, anything that looked critical. Glass shattered, circuit boards sparked, and Captain Shaw was screaming, "Stop him! Someone stop him!" But the chamber was chaos, smoke and darkness and everyone scrambling, and I had maybe 10 seconds before they organized an effective response. That's when Father Romano did something I'll never forget. This 70-year-old priest with a limp and arthritis, who'd spent his entire adult life in libraries and archives reading about ancient evils, he stepped between me and the soldiers who were finally getting their bearings and drawing their own weapons. He spread his arms wide like he was blessing a congregation, and he shouted in Latin, "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, I invoke sanctuary. This man acts in defense of God's creation, and I will not let you harm him." Rodriguez had his sidearm out, pointed at me but hesitating because Romano was in the way. "Father, move. That's a direct order." But Romano didn't budge. He just stood there, arms spread, an old man in black clothes literally putting his body between me and the people who wanted to stop me, and he looked over his shoulder at me with tears streaming down his face and said 4 words that gave me permission to do what I already knew I had to do. "Go, finish this." So I ran. Past the altar, past the seraphim statues, toward the ice block where Mikhail's eyes were still blazing with that terrible light, and behind me I heard the sound of a scuffle, Romano grunting in pain, Shaw's voice sharp with authority, and Patterson yelling, "Clear the line! Clear the—" But I was already there, already at the ice block, pressing my hands against its fractured surface. The cold hit me like lightning, instant frostbite burning my palms, and I screamed, but I didn't pull away because I needed this connection, needed Mikhail to know I'd done it. I'd stopped them. I'd bought him time, even if it cost me everything. His presence slammed into my mind with a force that made the previous communications feel like whispers. This was full contact, complete merger of consciousness. And for just a moment, I wasn't Marcus Cole anymore. I was something larger, something that could see time not as a line but as a landscape, past and future spread out simultaneously. I saw myself being arrested, court-martialed, imprisoned. I saw Sarah crying when they told her what I'd done, saw Jake asking questions she couldn't answer. But I also saw the alternative timeline, the one where I'd done nothing, where the extraction had completed and Mikhail had been removed and the seals had failed, and my family had died in terror and corruption. And given those 2 options, the choice was obvious. My suffering for their survival, my sacrifice for their future. It wasn't even difficult. Mikhail's voice came through crystal clear, and this time there was warmth in it, gratitude, something that might have been divine approval, or might have been just respect from one soldier to another. "Man of faith, thank you. You have done what needed to be done. You have held the line when everyone else faltered. You have chosen truth over comfort, duty over career, the many over the few. This will be remembered." I felt him beginning to withdraw, the connection thinning, and I wanted to ask him so many things. Would the seals hold now? How long did we have? What should I tell people when they asked why I'd done this? But he was already fading back into whatever dormant state he maintained within the ice, and his final words came through faint but clear. "Now run, Marcus Cole. Run and live. Protect your family. Watch for the signs. And remember, when we meet again, and we will meet again, it will be on the last day, when the 7th seal breaks naturally, when the sun returns to judge both the living and the dead. On that day, I will be freed from this prison, and you will stand beside me in the final battle. Until then, goodbye, friend. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace." And then he was gone, completely gone, the presence withdrawing so suddenly that I actually staggered, and my burned hands slipped off the ice surface, leaving skin behind, frozen to the crystalline structure like I'd touched liquid nitrogen. I turned around to face whatever was coming next, and found myself staring down the barrels of 3 pistols. Shaw, Rodriguez, and Patterson, all of them aimed center mass. all of them with expressions that mixed anger and betrayal and confusion. Behind them, Father Romano was on his knees, being restrained by one of the army engineers, blood running from his nose where someone had hit him. The chamber was a disaster, generators still smoldering, thermal units destroyed beyond repair, equipment scattered and damaged, and in the middle of it all, me with my hands burned raw and my service pistol empty on the floor where I'd dropped it. Captain Shaw's voice was cold, professional, the voice of someone doing an unpleasant job efficiently. Sergeant Marcus Cole, you are under arrest for destruction of government property, insubordination, assault on fellow soldiers, and sabotage of a classified military operation. You will be extracted to the surface, transported to a secure facility, and held pending court-martial. Do you have anything to say for yourself? I looked at her, then at the ice block behind me where Mikael rested undisturbed, then at Father Romano, who was smiling despite the blood on his face, and I said the only thing that mattered. Yeah, I do. I'd do it again, every single time, because some doors should stay closed, and some guardians should never be disturbed. Court-martial me if you want. But in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, when the world is still here and 7 billion people are still alive and nobody knows how close they came to extinction, remember this moment. Remember that someone chose to disobey, and remember why. Shaw's finger tightened on the trigger, not to shoot, just pressure, stress response. And for a second I thought she might actually be angry enough to do something stupid, but she didn't. She just lowered the weapon, gestured to Rodriguez and Patterson, and said one word: secure him. And as they moved in to restrain me, as the zip ties tightened around my wrists, and they started marching me toward the exit tunnel, I heard it one final time. Azazel's voice from below, frustrated now, angry, but also respectful. You have delayed the inevitable, child of Adam, but only delayed. The seventh seal weakens with each passing year, and when it finally breaks, not by your hand but by time itself, I will remember your name. Marcus Cole, the one who dared to defy both God and demon to protect his kind. Perhaps you will be worth keeping alive. Perhaps you will be useful in the world that is coming. And then silence. Complete silence. The breathing had stopped. The vibrations had ceased. The crack in the floor remained, but nothing moved within it. For now, at least, the temple was quiet, and the guardian remained at his post. The collapse started 20 minutes after they zip-tied my wrists and began marching me toward the exit tunnel. At first, it was just small tremors, the kind you might dismiss as normal ice settling, but they got stronger quickly, rhythmic, almost like something was deliberately destabilizing the structure from below. Captain Shaw called for immediate evacuation. Her exact words were, "All personnel extract now. This facility is compromised." And suddenly, everyone's priorities shifted from arresting me to not dying under 2 kilometers of collapsing ice and ancient stone. They cut the zip ties, handed me back my sidearm. Funny how quickly protocol goes out the window when survival is on the line. And we ran. All of us, together, soldiers and scientists and one bleeding priest, scrambling through corridors that were shedding stone dust from the ceiling, past the altar that was now cracking down the middle, past inscriptions that had survived 45 centuries, but were fracturing in real time as if the temple itself was choosing to die rather than risk further intrusion. Father Romano was limping badly, leaning on my shoulder despite his earlier beating, and as we passed the doorway to the central chamber, he looked back one final time at the ice block that contained Mikhail. The Archangel's eyes were closed again, his wings folded, peaceful as ever, and Romano made the sign of the cross and whispered something in Latin I didn't quite catch. The seraphim statues were toppling, one after another in sequence like dominoes, and the last thing I saw before we rounded the corner was the crack in the floor, that wound through which Azazel had spoken, sealing itself shut with new stone that bubbled up from below like scar tissue closing a wound. We made it to the ascent platform with maybe 30 seconds to spare before the main chamber ceiling collapsed entirely. The winch operator on the surface must have gotten the emergency signal because the platform was already rising before we'd all clipped in, yanking us up through the thermal tunnel so fast that my stomach lurched and my ears popped from the rapid altitude change. Behind and below us, I could hear the temple destroying itself. Not explosively, but methodically, stone grinding against stone, chambers folding in on themselves in what sounded almost like a controlled demolition. When we finally reached the surface, gasping in that brutal, -60 cold that felt like a blessing after everything we'd been through. I turned to look back at the entry point and watched as the entire thermal tunnel collapsed inward, the ice shelf settling like quicksand, filling the void with millions of tons of glacial ice that compressed and refroze almost instantly in the Antarctic cold. Within 10 minutes, there was no visible evidence that humans had ever been there. The entrance was gone, the tunnel was sealed, and Outpost Covenant, that modular base we'd descended from, was being rapidly dismantled by teams who'd apparently received orders to erase all trace of the operation. I was loaded onto a transport plane, still wearing my cold weather gear with dried blood on it, Romano's and mine mixed together. And as we lifted off, I looked out the window at that black structure on the horizon, the one I'd seen on arrival. It was sinking. Slowly but visibly, the entire temple was descending back into the ice shelf, being swallowed by the glacier like it had never existed. And I understood that Mikhail had done this, had triggered the collapse deliberately to ensure nobody could return, to buy himself centuries or millennia of undisturbed rest until the appointed time. The debriefing lasted 72 hours and took place in a facility I'm not allowed to name in a country I'm not allowed to identify. Just know it was underground, windowless, and staffed by people who never gave me their real names. They asked the same questions over and over in rotating shifts. What did I see in the temple? What did the entity communicate? Why did I destroy the extraction equipment? Did I receive instructions from a foreign intelligence service? Was I compromised by religious extremism? The questions came in waves, sometimes gentle and sympathetic, sometimes aggressive and accusatory. And through it all, I told them the truth. Exactly what happened. Exactly what I saw. Exactly what Mikhail showed me. They didn't believe me, of course. They had their own theories. Environmental psychosis from prolonged exposure to electromagnetic anomalies. Shared delusion triggered by the isolated environment and religious symbolism. Maybe even deliberate drugging by Father Romano, who they were certain was some kind of Vatican operative sent to sabotage American interests. On the second day, they brought in the drugs. Not recreational, not torture, medical. They called it memory consolidation therapy. But I knew what it really was. Chemical interrogation designed to separate truth from delusion, to see if my story would change under the influence of sodium pentothal and other compounds I didn't recognize. I told them the same story, word for word, because it wasn't a delusion or a lie. It was simply what happened. On the third day, they tried something different. A psychologist, or maybe a neuroscientist, his credentials were vague, explained they were going to use guided memory reformation to help me process the traumatic experience. What they actually did was hypnosis, combined with targeted electromagnetic stimulation, a protocol apparently designed to suppress or erase specific memories, usually reserved for soldiers who'd witnessed things so terrible that remembering them would make normal life impossible. I let them do it, went along with the process, let them put the crown of electrodes on my head, let them guide me into that suggestible state, listened as they told me over and over that what I'd seen in Antarctica was just a geological formation, that the entity in the ice was a crystalline formation that resembled humanoid shape, that my hallucinations were stress-induced and not real. And when they brought me out of the hypnotic state and asked me what I remembered about Antarctica, I looked them dead in the eye and recited back their cover story word perfect, like a good subject, like someone whose memory had been successfully edited. They were satisfied, congratulated themselves, released me with paperwork that said I'd been treated for acute stress reaction and environmental psychosis, full recovery expected, cleared for return to duty with psychological monitoring. But here's the thing they didn't know, couldn't know. It didn't work. The memory reformation, the drugs, the hypnosis, none of it worked. I remembered everything. Every word Mikhail had said, every vision he'd shown me, every detail of the temple and the seals and Azazel's voice from below. And I understood why I remembered when I shouldn't, because Mikhail had protected those memories, had marked them somehow as sacred, untouchable, necessary for me to carry into whatever future was coming. I was discharged 6 weeks later. Honorable discharge, medical separation. The paperwork cited service-related psychological trauma with full veteran benefits eligible. Translation: we don't trust you anymore, but we don't want you talking. So here's your pension and health care. Now please disappear quietly. I took the deal, signed the NDAs they put in front of me, even though we both knew I'd already violated them by telling the truth during debriefing. Packed up my life at Nellis, said goodbye to the guys in my unit with handshakes and promises to stay in touch that we both knew were lies, and I went home. Sarah was waiting on the porch when the taxi dropped me off. They'd told her I'd been injured in a training accident, needed psychiatric care, details classified, and when she saw me, she just started crying. Not sad crying, relief crying, the kind of tears that come when you've been terrified for weeks that the man you love might not come back whole. I held her for a long time, right there on the porch, and I felt 4-year-old Jake wrap his arms around my legs, and I understood that this was what I'd saved. This moment, this family, this future. I didn't tell Sarah what really happened. Couldn't. Both because of the NDAs and because how do you explain to your wife that you stopped the apocalypse and all it cost was your career? So I just held her and let her think whatever she needed to think about where I'd been and what I'd done. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it gets, when you're carrying knowledge that could end the world if the wrong people found out. I got a job as a security consultant. Boring, but stable. Enough money to keep us comfortable. Watched Jake grow up, taught him to throw a baseball, helped him with homework, did all the dad things I'd been terrified I'd never get to do. And every so often, a couple times a year maybe, there'd be a news story. Unusual seismic activity detected in Antarctica. Research teams report electromagnetic anomalies near Ross Ice Shelf. Unexplained temperature fluctuations in East Antarctic ice sheet. Nothing major. Nothing that made headlines beyond the science sections. But I noticed, and every time I saw one of those stories, I'd step outside, look up at the sky. Doesn't matter that Antarctica is south and I'm in Nevada. The gesture is symbolic, and I'd whisper the same thing. Hold on, Guardian. Just a little longer. Because I know he's still there. Still standing watch. Still holding back the 7 sealed horrors beneath his feet. Waiting for the day when the 7th seal breaks naturally and he can finally be free. I don't know when that day will come. Could be next week. Could be 1,000 years from now. But when it happens, when I hear reports of catastrophic ice shelf collapse in Antarctica, and beings emerging that science can't explain, I'll know, and I'll gather my family, and I'll do whatever I can to help them survive what's coming. And maybe, if I'm lucky, I'll see Mikael one more time before the end. And now you know, you, whoever's listening to this, wherever you are, there's something under the ice. Something that's been there since the flood, since before written history, since the days when angels walked the earth and giants were real. And it's still there right now as you're hearing these words, standing guard over 7 prisons that must not open before the appointed time. So pray for him, pray for the Guardian, pray that he has the strength to hold his post for as long as it takes. And pray that when the final seal breaks, when the last days finally come, that we're ready for what emerges. Because ready or not, someday, it's coming. And on that day, the world will learn that every myth was a memory, every legend was a warning, and the old gods were never stories at all. They were history we'd forgotten, until they remind us.